In the ancient land of Khubur, where the sands whispered secrets older than the stars, there lived a king named Keret, a man whose name was etched in the annals of Ugarit, a realm cradled by the azure arms of the great sea. The city of Khubur stood proud, its walls of sun-baked stone rising like sentinels against the horizon, kissed by the salt-laden breezes that carried tales of distant shores. Its markets bustled with merchants trading cedar, lapis, and amber, while its temples glowed with the flicker of oil lamps offered to the gods. Yet, beneath this vibrant tapestry, a shadow had fallen over the heart of its king, a sorrow so deep it seemed to dim the very sun. Keret was no ordinary ruler. Some whispered he was born of divine blood, a son of El, the great father of the gods, whose voice shaped the heavens and whose gaze calmed the chaos of the seas. His eyes, the color of twilight, held a quiet wisdom, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of one who had seen both glory and ruin. Once, his palace had echoed with the laughter of his children, 7 sons and a daughter, each a star in his sky. His wife, the queen whose name was lost to the winds, had been his anchor, her smile a beacon in the storm of kingship. But fate, like a merciless tide, had swept them all away. The gods, in their inscrutable will, had unleashed a cascade of calamities upon Keret's house. A plague, silent and cruel, stole his children in the night, their breaths fading like whispers in a storm. His wife, struck by fever, withered in his arms, her last words a prayer for his strength. War came next, with rival kings from distant lands who coveted Khubur's wealth. They burned fields and scattered Keret's warriors, leaving the king to bury his hopes beneath the ashes. The sea, too, turned against him, swallowing his ships in a tempest that roared with the fury of forgotten gods. By the time the stars gazed down upon Khubur once more, Keret stood alone, a king without a family, a man without a heart. Each night, he wandered the halls of his palace, his footsteps echoing on marble floors that once bore the patter of tiny feet. The tapestries, woven with scenes of triumph, mocked him with their faded colors. The throne, carved from cedar and inlaid with gold, felt cold beneath his touch, a reminder of duties he could no longer bear. His people, loyal yet fearful, watched their king diminish. His broad shoulders stooped, his once proud gaze fixed on the horizon as if searching for answers the gods withheld. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath, Keret climbed to the highest tower of Khubur, where the wind sang songs of eternity. There, beneath a canopy of stars, he wept. His tears fell like rain upon the stone, each one a plea to the heavens, a cry to El, the Father of all, to restore what had been lost. "Why must I walk this earth alone?" he whispered, his voice carried away by the wind. "What sin have I committed to bear such grief?" The stars, silent witnesses, offered no reply, and the gods seemed deaf to his sorrow. But El, the Ancient One, whose throne rested upon the clouds, heard the king's lament. In the realm of the divine, where time flowed like a river and dreams wove the fabric of fate, El stirred. His eyes, vast as the cosmos, saw Keret's pain, and his heart, boundless yet stern, softened for the mortal king who bore his blood. That night, as Keret lay upon his bed of cedar, his body heavy with despair, the veil between worlds parted, and a vision descended upon him. The air in his chamber grew warm, scented with myrrh and the faint tang of the sea. A soft light, like the glow of 1,000 fireflies, filled the room, and Keret's eyes fluttered closed, drawn into the embrace of sleep. In his dream, he stood upon a mountain, its peak wreathed in clouds that shimmered with silver and gold. Before him stood El, towering yet gentle, his robes flowing like rivers of starlight, his voice a melody that soothed the soul. "Keret, my son," El spoke, and the words were like a balm, easing the ache in the king's heart. Your grief has reached the heavens, and I have seen your tears. Fear not, for your line shall not perish, nor shall Khubur fade into shadow. I will grant you a new beginning, a wife whose beauty rivals the dawn, and children who will carry your name through the ages. Keret fell to his knees, his heart trembling with hope and doubt. Great El, how can this be? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. My house is broken, my strength wanes, and the gods have turned their faces from me. El's laughter was like the rustle of leaves in a sacred grove. Doubt not my will, Keret, for the gods weave paths where mortals see only ruin. You shall journey to Udum, a land of green valleys and silver streams, ruled by King Pabil. There you will find Huriya, his daughter, whose eyes hold the light of the moon and whose heart will bind your fate. Lead your army, offer gifts to the gods, and claim her as your bride. Through her, your line shall be reborn. The vision grew vivid, as if painted upon the canvas of Keret's mind. El showed him the path to Udum, a road winding through deserts where the sands glowed like embers, past oases where palm trees whispered secrets, and over hills where the wind sang of victory. He saw the city of Udum, its walls adorned with turquoise, and its gates guarded by lions of stone. He saw Huriya, her hair dark as the night, her presence a promise of renewal, and he saw his army, vast and resolute, marching under the banner of Khubur, their spears gleaming like stars. Before you set forth, El continued, his voice now a command, honor the gods with offerings. Seek the blessing of Atharat, the mother of creation, whose favor will shield you. Build altars, pour wine upon the earth, and sacrifice the finest of your flocks. Fail not in this, for the gods are ever watchful, and their wrath is a storm that spares none. As the vision faded, Keret awoke, his heart pounding, his breath quick with purpose. The chamber was dark once more, the scent of myrrh lingering faintly, but the weight of his sorrow had lifted, replaced by a spark of hope. He rose from his bed, his movements steady for the first time in years, and called for his scribes and generals. The stars still hung in the sky, their light a guide, as Keret began to prepare for the journey that would reshape his destiny. In the days that followed, Khubur stirred with new life. The forges roared, crafting spears and shields that gleamed like the sun. The priests chanted hymns to El and Atharat, their voices rising like smoke to the heavens. Keret, clad in robes of crimson and gold, stood before his people, his eyes alight with the fire of divine promise. We march to Udum, he declared, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd, to claim a future blessed by the gods. And so, under the watchful gaze of the stars, Keret set forth, his heart tethered to the vision of El, his steps guided by a dream that promised salvation. The sands of Khubur stretched before him, vast and unyielding, yet within them lay the path to a new dawn, a path woven by the hands of the gods. As the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, let the tale of Keret carry you into dreams, where the winds of Ugarit whisper and the gods watch over those who dare to hope. Sleep now, and let the story unfold in the quiet of your mind, where kings and gods walk hand in hand. The dawn broke over Khubur with a gentle blush, as if the sun itself hesitated to disturb the sacred purpose stirring within the city's walls. The air was heavy with a scent of cedar and frankincense, carried on breezes that whispered of journeys yet to come. King Keret, his heart kindled by the divine vision of El, stood upon the balcony of his palace, gazing out at the waking city. The streets below shimmered with the first light, their cobblestones gleaming like the scales of a great fish, and the people of Khubur moved with a quiet urgency, sensing the tide of destiny turning in their favor. The king's sorrow, though not forgotten, had been softened by hope. A fragile flame, nurtured by the promise of a new beginning. Keret's vision from El lingered in his mind like the afterglow of a star. The path to Udum, the city of green valleys and silver streams, called to him, and the image of Huria, the moonlit princess, danced in his thoughts. Yet the words of El carried a weight as heavy as the crown upon his brow. To honor the gods with offerings, to seek the blessing of Atherat, the mother of creation, whose favor could turn the sands of fate. Keret knew the journey would test not only his strength but his faith, for the gods were both generous and exacting, their gifts bound by the threads of sacred vows. In the great hall of the palace, where pillars of stone rose like ancient trees, Keret summoned his council. The air was thick with the scent of burning myrrh, and the flicker of oil lamps cast shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. His generals, clad in armor that gleamed like polished bronze, stood in a semicircle, their faces etched with loyalty and resolve. The high priest, Elim, whose white beard flowed like a river, held a staff adorned with lapis and gold, his eyes sharp with the wisdom of one who had spoken with the gods. Scribes, their fingers stained with ink, weighted with clay tablets, ready to record the king's commands. The hall was silent, save for the soft hum of anticipation, as Keret stepped forward, his crimson robes trailing like a river of fire. "People of Khubur," he began, his voice steady yet resonant, like the tolling of a distant bell, "the gods have spoken. El, the Father of all, has seen our grief and heard our cries. He has promised a new dawn for our land, a queen whose light will restore our house, and children who will carry our name through the ages. To Udum we shall march, to claim Huria, daughter of King Pabal, as my bride. But first, we must honor the gods, for their will is the foundation of our strength." The council bowed, their murmurs of assent rising like a chorus of waves. Elim stepped forward, his staff tapping the floor with a rhythm that echoed the heartbeat of the earth. "Great king," he said, his voice a low chant, "the gods demand reverence. Atherat, the lady of the sea and sky, must be appeased with offerings of wine and blood. El, the Eternal One, requires altars raised in his name. Only then will your path be clear, your spears blessed, your heart shielded from harm." Keret nodded, his mind alight with the memory of El's command. "So it shall be," he declared. "Let the forges burn day and night, crafting spears and shields to arm our warriors. Let the priests prepare the altars, and let the people bring their finest offerings. We march not as conquerors, but as bearers of a divine mandate, to forge a future woven by the hands of the gods." The city of Khubur sprang to life, its pulse quickening with purpose. In the forges, blacksmiths worked tirelessly, their hammers ringing like bells against the anvil, shaping blades that caught the light like slivers of the moon. Sparks flew, painting the air with fleeting constellations, and the scent of molten iron mingled with the salt of the sea. In the fields beyond the city, shepherds selected the finest lambs, their wool soft as clouds, to be offered to Atherat. Vintners pressed grapes from the hills, filling jars with wine as red as the dawn, to be poured upon the sacred earth. Women wove banners of crimson and gold, embroidering them with the symbols of Elibul's head, a crescent moon, while children sang hymns that floated through the streets like petals on the wind. At the heart of Khubur stood the great temple of El, its walls adorned with carvings of stars and waves, its courtyard open to the sky. Here, Keret oversaw the preparations for the rituals, his presence a beacon to his people. The priests, robed in white linen, moved with deliberate grace, piling cedar wood upon the altars until the air was thick with its resinous scent. Elim, his hands trembling with reverence, anointed the stones with oil, chanting prayers that invoked the names of the gods: El, the creator; Atherat, the nurturer; Baal, the storm bringer. The people gathered, their faces upturned, their voices joining in a hymn that rose like smoke to the heavens. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet, the first ritual began. Keret, clad in a mantle of deep blue, stood before the altar, a silver chalice in his hands. The wine within shimmered like liquid fire, reflecting the torchlight that encircled the courtyard. He raised the chalice, his voice steady as he spoke the ancient words. To Atherat, Mother of all, I offer this gift, that your light may guide us, your strength shield us, your mercy renew us. He poured the wine upon the altar, and it flowed over the stones, a crimson river that sank into the earth, a promise sealed in blood and spirit. Next came the sacrifice. A lamb, its eyes gentle and unafraid, was led to the altar by a young priestess whose hands were adorned with henna. Elim placed his hand upon the creature's head, whispering a prayer that carried its soul to the gods. With a swift, merciful stroke, the blade met flesh, and the lamb's blood joined the wine, a sacred offering to bind the mortal and divine. The crowd was silent, their breaths held, as the smoke from the burning cedar rose in spirals, carrying their hopes to the heavens. Keret felt the weight of the moment, the eyes of his people and the gods upon him. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he saw her again, Huriah, her face radiant in the vision, her presence a promise of renewal. The thought steadied him, and he turned to his generals, his voice firm. Gather the army, he commanded. Let every warrior be armed, every horse saddled, every heart prepared. We march at dawn under the banner of El to Udum. The night passed in a hush, the city alive with quiet purpose. Warriors polished their armor, their movements deliberate, their thoughts on the journey ahead. Mothers kissed their sons, whispering blessings for their safe return. In the palace, Keret knelt before a small shrine, a single lamp casting its glow upon a carving of El's bull, symbol of strength and creation. Guide me, Father, he whispered, his voice soft as a prayer. Let my steps be true, my heart steadfast, my vow unbroken. As the first light of dawn touched the towers of Khubur, the army assembled in the great square, a sea of bronze and crimson beneath the rising sun. Keret stood before them, his sword at his side, his eyes alight with the fire of divine purpose. The banners snapped in the wind, their symbols gleaming, and the people cheered, their voices a tide that carried the king's resolve. The journey to Udum lay ahead, a path through deserts and hills, guided by the will of the gods. As the stars faded and the world awoke, Keret led his people forth, his heart tethered to the vision that had promised salvation. The sands of Khubur stretched before him, vast and unyielding, yet within them lay the road to a new dawn, a road blessed by the hands of the divine. Sleep now, dear listener, as the tale of Keret weaves through your dreams. Let the rhythm of his march, the scent of cedar and wine, carry you into a world where gods and mortals walk together, where hope rises like the dawn over the sands of Ugarit. The sun rose over the sands of Khubur, its golden light spilling across the dunes like a river of molten amber, as King Keret led his army forth from the city. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the faint scent of dust and distant myrrh, and the horizon stretched endless, a canvas of gold and ochre painted by the hands of the gods. The banners of Khubur, crimson and gold, fluttered in the breeze, their symbols of El's bull and crescent moon catching the light like beacons of divine promise. Keret, astride a white stallion whose mane flowed like sea foam, rode at the head of his host, his eyes fixed on the path to Udum, the city of green valleys where Huriah awaited, her image a star in his heart. The army marched in disciplined ranks, 1,000 spears glinting like stars fallen to earth. Warriors clad in bronze armor moved with steady purpose, their footsteps a soft drumbeat against the sand. Chariots rumbled, their wheels carving paths through the dunes, while scouts rode ahead, their eyes sharp for signs of danger or blessing. Behind them, priests bore sacred relic small idols of El and Atharat, carved from cedar and inlaid with lap-chanting hymns that wove through the air like threads of smoke. The people of Khubur, gathered at the city gates, watched their king depart, their prayers rising like a tide to carry him toward his destiny. The desert was a vast and silent world, its sands whispering secrets older than memory. By day, the sun burned fierce, turning the air into a furnace that tested the resolve of even the strongest warriors. By night, the stars blazed, their cold light a reminder of the gods' watchful gaze. Keret rode with a quiet strength, his crimson cloak billowing behind him, his thoughts a tapestry of hope and doubt. The vision of El sustained him the promise of Huria, of children to rebuild his house, of a future where Khubur's light would not fade. Yet the desert was no gentle guide, and its trials were as relentless as the gods themselves. On the first day, the army crossed a plain where the sand glowed like embers, each step raising clouds of dust that clung to their skin like a second shadow. The heat pressed down, heavy and unyielding, and the warriors' lips grew dry, their waterskins dwindling. Keret, ever mindful of his people, ordered halts at oases where palms swayed like dancers and springs bubbled with water as clear as crystal. Here, the army rested, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves, their spirits lifted by the cool shade. Keret knelt by one such spring, cupping the water in his hands, and whispered a prayer to El, thanking him for the small mercies that sustained their journey. But the desert was not only a place of heat and thirst, it was a realm where the divine and mortal worlds brushed close, where omens appeared in the shifting sands and the songs of the wind. On the third night, as the army camped beneath a sky ablaze with stars, a strange light flickered on the horizon, a silver glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The priests, led by Elim, gathered around a fire, their faces grave as they read the signs. "An omen from Atharat," Elim declared, his voice low and resonant. "She watches, and her favor hangs in the balance. We must offer a gift to honor her, lest her wrath turn the sands against us." Keret, his heart heavy with the weight of divine expectation, ordered a new altar built. The warriors gathered stones smoothed by centuries of wind, piling them into a circle beneath the stars. A young goat, its coat as white as moonlight, was brought forth, its bleating soft and plaintive. Keret himself took the blade, his hands steady as he spoke the ancient words, "To Atharat, Lady of Creation, I offer this life, that your grace may guide our path, and your mercy shield our hearts." The sacrifice was swift, the blood soaking into the sand, and the priests burned cedar branches, their smoke curling upward like a prayer. The silver glow on the horizon faded, and a cool breeze swept through the camp, a sign that Atharat had accepted the offering. Yet the desert held other challenges, tests not of heat or thirst but of spirit. On the fifth day, a sandstorm rose without warning, a wall of swirling gold that roared like a beast awakened from slumber. The sky darkened, the sun veiled, and the army faltered, their banners snapping wildly in the gale. Keret dismounted, his cloak whipping about him, and raised his hands to the heavens. "El, Father of all, guide us through this tempest," he called, his voice cutting through the storm's fury. As if in answer, a single ray of light pierced the clouds, illuminating a narrow path through the dunes. The army followed, their steps sure, and emerged from the storm unscathed, their faith in their king and his divine mandate renewed. That night, as the army rested in a valley where acacias bloomed with flowers like tiny suns, Keret dreamed again. The air in his tent grew warm, scented with myrrh and the faint tang of the sea, and the veil between worlds parted once more. In his vision, he stood upon a hill overlooking Udum, its walls gleaming with turquoise, its gates guarded by lions of stone. Huriya stood before him, her eyes like pools of moonlight, her voice a melody that soothed his soul. "Come, Keret," she whispered, her words carried on the wind. "The gods have woven our fates together, and through us, Khubur shall rise anew." But the vision shifted, and a shadow fell across the hill. A voice, cold and stern, spoke from the darkness Atharat, her presence vast and unyielding. "Keep your vows, son of El," she warned, her words like thunder in his heart. "Fail me, and the sands will swallow your dreams." Keret awoke, his breath quick, his hands trembling. The dream was both a promise and a warning, a reminder that the gods' gifts came with a price. He rose before dawn, his resolve hardened, and gathered his generals beneath the fading stars. "The gods have spoken," he said, his voice steady as the stone of Khubur's walls. "Udum lies beyond these sands, and with it our future. Let no heart falter, for El and Atharat guide our steps." The generals bowed, their eyes alight with loyalty, and the army prepared to march once more. As the sun climbed higher, the desert revealed a new landscape, hills of red stone rising like the bones of the earth, their surfaces carved with ancient symbols worn smooth by time. The army wound through narrow passes, the air cooler now, scented with wild thyme and the distant promise of green valleys. Scouts returned with tales of Udum's borders, of fields where wheat swayed like waves and streams ran silver under the sun. Keret's heart quickened, for the vision of El was unfolding before him, each step bringing him closer to Huriya and the destiny she represented. The journey was not without its burdens. Some warriors grew weary, their steps heavy with the weight of the desert's trials. Keret moved among them, his presence a quiet strength, offering words of encouragement that fell like rain upon parched earth. "We march for Khubur," he told them, his voice soft yet firm. "For our children, for our future, for the gods who watch over us." His words rekindled their spirits, and the army pressed on, their spears raised like a forest of light. As the day faded into twilight, the army camped at the edge of a great plain, the horizon glowing with the promise of Udum. Keret stood alone, his eyes tracing the stars, his heart tethered to the vision that had set him on this path. The desert whispered around him, its voice a lullaby of ancient truths, and he felt the presence of El, a warmth that wrapped him like a cloak. Sleep now, dear listener, as the sands of Ugarit cradle you in their embrace. Let the rhythm of Keret's march, the scent of thyme and cedar, carry you into dreams where the gods weave fates and the stars light the way to a new dawn. The desert gave way to a land of gentle hills, where the sands of Khubur softened into fields of swaying wheat and streams that sparkled like threads of silver under the midday sun. The air was cooler now, scented with wild lavender and the faint sweetness of ripened figs, a promise of the fertile valleys of Udum. King Keret, his crimson cloak dusted with the golden grains of the desert, led his army through the final pass, their banners of El's bull and crescent moon catching the breeze like sails on a sacred sea. The journey had been long, marked by trials of heat and storm, but the sight of Udum's distant walls, gleaming with turquoise and guarded by lions of stone, stirred Keret's heart with a quiet fire. The vision of El, the promise of Huriya, and the hope of a reborn Khubur lay just beyond those gates. The army of Khubur moved with disciplined grace, their spears a forest of light, their armor polished to mirror the sky. Chariots rolled softly over the earth, their wheels humming a low song, while priests chanted hymns to El and Atharat, their voices weaving through the air like threads of mist. Keret rode at the forefront, his white stallion stepping lightly, its eyes bright, with the same resolve that burned in its master's heart. The warriors, though weary from the desert's trials, stood tall, their spirits lifted by the nearness of their goal. Yet Keret knew the path to Huriya was not one of conquest alone. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy, bound by the will of the gods and the weight of his vows. As the army crested a final hill, Udum revealed itself in full splendor. The city nestled in a valley where olive trees stood like ancient sentinels, their leaves shimmering silver in the sunlight. Its walls, adorned with mosaics of turquoise and lapis, rose high, reflecting the wealth and pride of King Pabil's realm. The gates, flanked by towering statues of lions with eyes of obsidian, seemed to watch the approaching army, their stone gazes both majestic and stern. Beyond the walls, rooftops gleamed with terracotta, and the faint sound of lyres and laughter drifted on the wind, a sign of a city at peace, unaware of the tide of fate drawing near. Keret halted his army at a respectful distance, their banners lowered as a gesture of peace. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft earth, and turned to Ilim, the high priest, whose white robes glowed like moonlight against the green of the valley. "The gods have led us here," Keret said, his voice steady yet soft, like a river flowing over smooth stones. "But it is not with swords that we will win Hurriya. We must honor El's command and seek Pabil's favor, for the path to Udum's heart lies through words, not war." Ilim nodded, his staff tapping the ground with a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the earth. "The gods watch, O king," he replied, his eyes scanning the horizon as if reading signs in the clouds. "Atharat's favor is fragile, and El's promise depends on your wisdom. Offer gifts, speak with humility, and let the divine will guide your tongue." Keret called for his heralds, who bore chests of cedar inlaid with gold, filled with treasures from Khubur, jars of honey, sweet wine, bolts of crimson cloth woven with threads of silver, and amulets carved with the symbols of El. A small retinue was assembled in warriors, their armor polished to a gleam, and 2 priests carrying incense burners that trailed clouds of myrrh. Keret, clad in a robe of deep blue embroidered with stars, led the group toward Udum's gates, his heart a balance of hope and caution. As they approached, the gates swung open, and a delegation from Udum emerged. At their head stood a man of regal bearing, his beard streaked with silver, his robes a cascade of green and gold. This was Pabil, king of Udum, his eyes sharp with the wisdom of years, his presence commanding yet tempered by curiosity. Behind him stood his guards, their spears adorned with feathers, and a woman whose beauty caught the breath of all who saw her. Hurriya, daughter of Pabil, stood like a vision from Keret's dream, her hair dark as the night sky, her eyes like pools of moonlight, her gown flowing like a river touched by starlight. Keret's heart stirred, but he held his gaze steady, mindful of the god's watchful eyes. "King Keret of Khubur," Pabil called, his voice resonant yet guarded. "What brings you to Udum with an army at your back? Do you come as friend or foe?" Keret stepped forward, his hands open in a gesture of peace. "King Pabil, I come not with war but with a heart guided by El, the father of all. The gods have spoken, and their will has led me to your gates. I seek Hurriya, your daughter, to be my queen, that our houses may be joined, and our lands blessed. I bring gifts to honor Udum, and vows to ensure peace between us." Pabil's eyes narrowed, studying Keret with the scrutiny of one who had guarded his city through years of prosperity and peril. Hurriya stood silent, her gaze meeting Keret's for a fleeting moment, a spark of recognition passing between them, as if the gods had already woven their fates together. The air grew still, the scent of lavender and myrrh mingling, and the moment hung like a thread stretched taut. Before Pabil could respond, a shadow passed over the valley, a cloud that seemed to pulse with a silver light. The priests of both Khubur and Udum stirred, their murmurs rising like a tide. Ilim raised his staff, his voice low but urgent. "An omen," he whispered. "Atharat speaks." The cloud parted, and a single eagle soared above, its wings catching the sun, a sign of divine favor, yet also a warning of the god's vigilance. Keret felt the weight of Atharat's words from his dream, her command to keep his vows, and his resolve hardened. Pabil too saw the omen, and his expression softened, though his voice remained firm. The gods have spoken, Keret, and their signs cannot be ignored. But Udum is not a prize to be claimed lightly. My daughter is the light of this city, and her hand is not given without proof of your worth. Name your terms, and let us see if peace can bind our houses. Keret bowed, his heart steady despite the challenge. I offer peace, Pabil, and the strength of Khubur to stand beside Udum. Let your daughter be my queen, and I vow to honor her, to protect our lands, and to offer tribute to the gods who guide us. Let us build altars together, to El and Atharat, and seal this bond with their blessing. The negotiations stretched into the evening. The valley bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Torches were lit, their flames dancing like spirits, and the two kings spoke of alliances, of shared prosperity, of the gods who watched over their fates. Huriya, though silent, was a presence that filled the air, her beauty a reminder of the divine promise that had set Keret on this path. The priests burned incense, their chants rising like a lullaby, and the eagle circled once more before vanishing into the stars. As night fell, Pabil invited Keret and his retinue into Udum's great hall, where tables were laden with bread, figs, and wine. The air was warm with the scent of roasted lamb and the sound of lyres, a fragile peace settling over the gathering. Keret felt the weight of his mission, the delicate balance of mortal will and divine mandate. He knew the path to Huriya's hand would not be won in a single night, but the gods had opened the door, and he would walk through it with faith. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Udum shine above you, their light a guide through the dreams where kings and gods weave their fates. Let the scent of lavender and myrrh, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into a world where hope rises like the moon over the valleys of Ugarit. The great hall of Udum glowed under the flicker of 100 oil lamps, their golden light dancing across walls adorned with mosaics of stars and waves, a testament to the city's reverence for the gods. The air was warm, scented with roasted lamb, ripe figs, and the sweet tang of pomegranate wine, while the soft strains of lyres wove through the murmurs of gathered nobles. King Keret sat at the high table, his crimson and blue robes catching the light like a sunset over the sea, his eyes calm yet alight with purpose. Across from him, King Pabil, regal in green and gold, presided with the quiet authority of a ruler who had guarded Udum's prosperity through years of peace and peril. At Pabil's side stood Huriya, her presence a quiet radiance, her dark hair cascading like a river under the moonlight, her eyes meeting Keret's with a fleeting intensity that stirred his heart. The negotiations had stretched through the evening, a delicate dance of words and intentions, each phrase weighed as carefully as gold on a merchant's scale. Keret had offered peace, tribute, and the strength of Khubur to stand beside Udum, his voice steady as he spoke of a union blessed by El, the father of all. Pabil listened, his expression a mask of measured thought, his fingers tracing the rim of a silver goblet. The eagle's flight at the gates, a divine omen, hung over the gathering like a whisper from the gods, urging caution yet promising favor. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very stones of Udum waited for the fates of two kings to intertwine. Keret of Khubur, Pabil said at last, his voice resonant, carrying the weight of a city's pride. Your words speak of peace, and your gifts honor our house. But Huriya is not merely my daughter. She is Udum's heart, its light. To give her hand is to bind our fates, and such a bond requires more than promises. What vow do you offer to prove your heart is true, that Khubur will stand as Udum's ally and not its master? Keret rose, his movements deliberate, his gaze steady as he met Pabil's eyes. Great Pabil, I vow before El and Atharet, whose eyes see all, that Huriya will be my queen, honored above all, her voice heard in my councils, her light the guide of my house. Khubur offers not dominion but kinship, a shared strength to honor the gods and prosper our lands. Let us build altars together, pour wine upon the earth, and seal this union with the blessings of the divine. The hall fell silent, the lyres pausing, the nobles leaning forward, as if drawn by the gravity of Keret's words. Huriya's gaze flickered to her father, then back to Keret, a spark of curiosity in her eyes, as if she saw in him the echo of a dream she had not yet named. Pabil stroked his beard, his eyes narrowing, then softening. Your words are fair, Keret, he said, and the gods have sent signs that cannot be ignored. But let us test this bond with a shared offering, a ritual to bind our houses before the heavens. Tomorrow, at dawn, we shall raise altars to El and Atharet, and let their will guide our path. Keret bowed, his heart lifting like a sail catching the wind. So it shall be, he replied, his voice a melody of resolve. The hall erupted in murmurs of approval, and the lyres resumed, their notes weaving a tapestry of hope. Huriya's lips curved in a faint smile, a gesture as fleeting as a star's reflection on water. Yet it warmed Keret's soul, a reminder of El's vision that had set him on this journey. As the feast continued, Keret found himself drawn to Huriya, though protocol kept them apart. She moved through the hall with grace, speaking softly to nobles and attendants, her presence a quiet force that commanded respect without demand. When their eyes met across the crowded hall, it was as if the gods had paused time, the noise fading to a distant hum. Keret saw in her the promise of renewal, not only for himself but for Khubur, a queen whose strength would anchor his house against the storms of fate. At dawn, the valley of Udum awoke to a sky painted in hues of rose and gold, the air crisp with the scent of dew and wild thyme. The two kings, flanked by their priests and nobles, gathered in a sacred grove just beyond the city walls, where ancient olive trees stood like guardians of time. The grove was a place of power, its earth hallowed by generations of offerings, its air thick with the presence of the divine. Ilim, the high priest of Khubur, and Udum's chief priestess, a woman named Shala whose eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, prepared the altars side by side. Stones were piled with care, smoothed by the hands of the faithful, and cedar branches were laid upon them, their resinous scent rising like a prayer. Keret and Pabil stood together, their robes brushing the earth, their hands raised in unison. Ilim and Shala chanted, their voices blending in a harmony that seemed to call the gods themselves to witness. To El, creator of all, we offer our faith, Ilim intoned, pouring wine from a silver jar, its crimson stream glistening as it soaked the altar. To Atharet, mother of creation, we offer our devotion, Shala added, her hands scattering petals of saffron that fluttered like tiny flames. A pair of doves, their wings soft as whispers, were released to the sky, their flight a symbol of peace between Khubur and Udum. As the ritual reached its peak, a breeze stirred the grove, carrying the scent of olive and myrrh. The leaves rustled, and a single ray of sunlight pierced the canopy, bathing the altars in a golden glow. The gathered crowd gasped, and Huriya, standing at her father's side, lifted her eyes to the sky, her face radiant with wonder. Keret felt the presence of El, a warmth that wrapped him like a cloak, and he knew the gods had blessed this moment. Yet in his heart he heard the echo of Atharat's warning from his dream. Keep your vows, son of El, or the sands will swallow your dreams. The thought steadied him, anchoring his resolve to honor the gods above all. That evening, Pabil invited Keret to walk with him through Udum's gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. Huriya joined them, her presence a quiet melody in the night. The two kings spoke of their lands, their hopes, and the gods who bound them. Pabil's voice softened as he spoke of Huria, his pride in her wisdom and her strength. "She is my heart," he said, his eyes resting on his daughter. "If she is to be your queen, Keret, let her be your partner, not merely your prize." Keret nodded, his gaze meeting Huria's. "She will be my light," he said softly, and for the first time, Huria spoke directly to him, her voice clear and steady. "If the gods have woven our paths together, King Keret, then let us walk them with truth and honor." Her words were a vow of their own, a thread that bound their fates closer. The night deepened, the stars of Udum shining like lanterns above the grove. The agreement was near, a union of houses blessed by the gods, but Keret felt the weight of the journey still ahead. The rituals had strengthened the bond, but the final terms of the alliance, and Huria's hand, hung in the balance. As he returned to his camp, the scent of jasmine lingered, and the memory of Huria's voice carried him into dreams. Sleep now, dear listener, as the gardens of Udum cradle you in their embrace. Let the light of the altars, the song of the fountains, carry you into a world where kings and queens weave their fates under the watchful eyes of the gods. The dawn over Udum broke with a serenity that seemed to hush the world, as if the gods themselves paused to witness the union of two great houses. The valley glowed with a soft light, its fields of wheat swaying like a golden sea, its streams reflecting the rose and amber hues of the sky. The air was fragrant with jasmine and the faint smoke of sacred fires, a reminder of the rituals that had bound Khubur and Udum in a fragile thread of peace. King Keret stood at the edge of his camp, his crimson and blue robes catching the morning breeze, his heart a vessel of hope and reverence. The vision of El, the promise of Huria as his queen, and the weight of his vow to Atherat pulsed within him like a sacred rhythm, guiding his steps toward the city's gates. The negotiations with King Pabil had woven a delicate tapestry of trust, each word and gesture a stitch in the fabric of alliance. The immense the eagle's flight, the golden light upon the altar shad spoken of divine favor, yet the god's will was a river with hidden currents, and Keret felt their gaze upon him, steady and unyielding. Huria, the daughter of Udum, had become more than a vision. Her presence in the great hall, her words of truth and honor, had kindled a warmth in Keret's heart, a spark that promised not only the restoration of his house but a partnership forged in mutual respect. As the sun climbed higher, Pabil summoned Keret to the palace, a grand structure of white stone and turquoise mosaics that rose like a beacon above the valley. The great hall was adorned with garlands of laurel and myrtle, their leaves shimmering in the light of oil lamps. Nobles from both Khubur and Udum gathered, their robes a cascade of colors, their voices a soft hum of anticipation. At the center of the hall stood a dais, where Pabil and Huria waited, the king's face a blend of pride and caution, the princess's eyes bright with a quiet strength that seemed to draw the light itself. "Keret of Khubur," Pabil began, his voice carrying the weight of a father and a king. "The gods have spoken through signs and rituals, and your words have proven your heart. Udum accepts your vow of peace, and I offer my daughter, Huria, as your queen, to bind our houses and honor the divine will. Let this union be sealed with a ceremony that sings to the heavens, that El and Atherat may bless our lands with prosperity and peace." Keret bowed, his heart swelling with a joy tempered by reverence. "Great Pabil, I accept this bond with gratitude and vow to honor Huria as my queen, to guard Udum as my own, and to uphold the will of the gods who guide us." His eyes met Huria's, and in that moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them, a silent promise passing like a breeze through a sacred grove. Huria's lips curved in a smile, soft yet resolute. and Keret felt the echo of El's vision, the certainty that their union was woven by divine hands. The betrothal was announced with a flourish of trumpets, their notes ringing through the valley like a call to the stars. The people of Udum poured into the streets, their cheers mingling with the songs of priests and the laughter of children. Preparations for the marriage ceremony began at once, the city alive with purpose. Women wove garlands of roses and saffron, their petals bright as the dawn, while artisans crafted a canopy of linen embroidered with silver threads, a shelter for the sacred vows. The priests of Udum and Khubur worked side by side, building altars of cedar and stone, their surfaces polished to mirror the sky. The ceremony was set for the following dawn, in the sacred grove where the previous rituals had been held. The olive trees, ancient and wise, stood as witnesses, their leaves whispering secrets of the earth. As night fell, Keret walked alone through Udum's gardens, the air cool and scented with jasmine. The stars above burned bright, their light a map of the god's will, and he knelt before a small shrine to El, its bull carving glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Father of all," he whispered, "guide my heart, that I may honor this bond and keep my vows to you and Atharat." The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of myrrh, and Keret felt a warmth, as if El's hand rested upon him. At dawn, the grove was transformed into a sanctuary of light and sound. The altars blazed with cedar fires, their smoke curling upward like prayers. The canopy, its silver threads catching the sun, stood at the grove's heart, beneath which Keret and Huriah would pledge their vows. The people of Udum and Khubur gathered, their voices a soft chorus of hymns, their faces alight with hope. Huriah appeared, her gown a cascade of white and gold, her hair adorned with pearls that gleamed like stars. Keret, in robes of crimson and blue, stood tall, his presence a pillar of strength, yet his eyes softened as they met hers. Elim and Shala, the priests of Khubur and Udum, led the ceremony, their voices blending in a chant that invoked the gods. "To El, creator of all, we offer this union," Elim intoned, pouring wine upon the altar, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. "To Atharat, mother of creation, we dedicate this bond," Shala added, scattering petals of myrtle that fluttered like butterflies. A pair of lambs, their wool soft as clouds, were offered, their blood a seal of the sacred pact. The crowd watched in silence, their breaths held, as the smoke rose, and the sun bathed the grove in gold. Keret took Huriah's hands, their warmth a steady anchor in the tide of the moment. "Huriah, daughter of Udum," he said, his voice clear yet gentle, "I vow to be your partner, your shield, your light. With you, I will rebuild my house, honor the gods, and bring peace to our lands." Huriah's eyes shone, her voice a melody as she replied, "Keret, king of Khubur, I vow to stand beside you, to share your burdens, and to weave our fates together under the gods' gaze." Their words were a thread, binding their hearts and their houses, witnessed by the divine. As the vows were sealed, a soft breeze swept through the grove, carrying the scent of cedar and myrtle. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising like a wave, and the lyres played a song that seemed to echo the stars. Yet in that moment of joy, Keret felt a shadow, a whisper of Atharat's warning in his dream. "Keep your vows, or the sands will swallow your dreams." He pushed the thought aside, focusing on Huriah's smile, the warmth of her hands, the promise of a new dawn. The feast that followed filled Udum with light and laughter. Tables groaned under the weight of bread, roasted meats, and jars of wine, while dancers spun under the stars, their movements a celebration of life. Keret and Huriah sat together, their hands brushing as they shared a goblet. their laughter a quiet harmony. Pabil watched, his eyes warm with pride, and the people of both cities mingled, their differences softened by the bond forged that day. As the night deepened, Keret and Huriya stepped away from the feast, walking to the edge of the grove where the stars shone brightest. The air was cool, the world hushed, and for a moment they were not king and queen but two souls bound by fate. "The gods have brought us here," Huriya said softly, her eyes tracing the constellations. "And with them, we will face whatever lies ahead." Keret nodded, his heart full, yet the weight of Atharat's warning lingered, a shadow on the edge of his joy. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Udum cradle you in their light. Let the song of the lyres, the scent of myrtle and cedar, carry you into dreams where love and divine will weave a tapestry of hope and destiny. The sun rose over the hills of Khubur, its golden light spilling across the city like a blessing, bathing the stone walls and cedar rooftops in a warm glow. The air was rich with the scent of blooming oleander and the faint salt of the great sea, carried on a breeze that whispered of hope and new beginnings. King Keret and his new queen, Huriya, stood at the gates of Khubur, their hands entwined, their presence a beacon to the people who had gathered to welcome them home. The banners of Khubur, crimson and gold, fluttered proudly, their symbols of El's bull and crescent moon catching the light like promises fulfilled. The journey from Udum had been swift, the desert sands parting as if guided by the gods, and now, with Huriya at his side, Keret felt the weight of his sorrow lift, replaced by a quiet joy that pulsed like a heartbeat. The city of Khubur was transformed by their return. The streets, once shadowed by the king's grief, now hummed with life, as if the stones themselves sang of renewal. Merchants reopened their stalls, offering silks and spices with smiles that mirrored the dawn. Children ran through the squares, their laughter a melody that wove through the air, while women wove garlands of myrtle and laurel to adorn the palace. The temple of El, its walls carved with stars and waves, glowed with fresh offerings, jars of honey, baskets of figs, and lamps burning with the sweet scent of myrrh. The people looked to Keret and Huriya with awe, seeing in their union a sign of divine favor, a promise that Khubur would rise once more. Huriya moved through the city with a grace that seemed to calm the very winds. Her gown of white linen, embroidered with silver threads, shimmered like moonlight on water, and her dark hair, crowned with a circlet of pearls, framed a face that held both strength and kindness. She spoke with the elders, her voice soft yet clear, learning the names of their children and the stories of their fields. She knelt with the priests, offering prayers to El and Atharat, her hands steady as she poured wine upon the altars. To Keret, she was more than a queen. She was a partner whose wisdom steadied his heart, whose presence filled the empty halls of his palace with light. The early days of their reign were marked by prosperity. The fields beyond Khubur bloomed with wheat and barley, their golden stalks swaying like a sea under the sun. The sea, once a harbinger of loss, now yielded bountiful catches, the fishermen's nets heavy with silver-scaled fish. Trade flourished, with caravans arriving from distant lands, their camels laden with amber, lapis, and cedar. The people whispered that El had blessed Khubur, that Atharat's hand guided the seasons, and that Huriya's arrival was a gift from the gods. Keret, watching his city thrive, felt a gratitude so deep it seemed to root him to the earth, yet beneath it, a shadow stirred a faint unease tied to the vow he had made to Atharat. In the quiet hours of dawn, Keret would walk to the temple of El, where the air was cool and scented with cedar smoke. He knelt before the great bull statue, its eyes of polished obsidian gleaming with an ancient wisdom, and prayed for guidance. "Father El," he whispered, "you have fulfilled your promise, and my heart is full. Yet the words of Atherat linger, her warning await upon my soul. Guide me, that I may honor my vows and keep Khubur's light burning. The temple was silent, save for the soft flicker of lamps, but Keret felt a warmth, as if El's gaze rested upon him, steady and eternal. Huria, too, sensed the undercurrent of Keret's unease, though he spoke little of it. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars, she took his hand, her touch a gentle anchor. "Keret," she said, her voice a melody that soothed the night, "your heart carries a shadow, even in this time of joy. Share it with me, that we may face it together." Keret hesitated, his eyes tracing the constellations, then spoke of the dream Atherat's warning to keep his vows, the fear that a misstep could unravel the blessings they had gained. Huria listened, her gaze steady, and nodded. "The gods are both generous and exacting," she said. "We will honor them together, with offerings and truth, and trust their will to guide us." To strengthen their bond with the gods, Keret and Huria ordered a grand festival to celebrate their union and give thanks to El and Atherat. The city prepared with fervor, the streets adorned with banners and garlands, the air alive with the scent of baking bread and roasting lamb. Altars were raised in every square, piled with cedar and anointed with oil, their fires burning bright under the midday sun. Priests chanted hymns, their voices rising like waves, while dancers spun in circles, their robes a blur of crimson and gold. Huria, radiant in a gown of blue and silver, joined Keret in offering the first sacrifice, a pair of doves, their wings catching the light as they were released to the heavens, a symbol of peace and devotion. The festival stretched into the night, the stars of Khubur shining like lanterns above the revelry. Tables groaned under the weight of feast splatters of figs, pomegranates, and honeyed cakes, jars of wine that glowed like rubies in the torchlight. Keret and Huria moved among their people, their laughter mingling with the songs of the lyres, their presence a reminder of the divine promise that had brought them together. Yet, as the night deepened, Keret's unease grew, a quiet whisper in his heart. He had vowed to Atherat during the journey to Udum, promising a tribute of gold and silver upon his success. But in the joy of his union, the vow had slipped from his mind, unfulfilled. That night, as the palace grew quiet and the stars held sway, Keret dreamed again. The air in his chamber grew warm, scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea, and the veil between worlds parted. He stood upon a cliff overlooking a vast ocean, its waves crashing like the voice of Atherat herself. The goddess appeared, her form vast and radiant, her eyes like storms held in check. "Keret, son of El," she said, her voice a thunder that shook his soul, "you have taken Huria, and Khubur blooms, but your vow to me lies forgotten. Honor it, or my wrath will turn your joy to ash." The vision faded, and Keret awoke, his breath quick, his heart heavy with dread. He rose before dawn, seeking Huria in the garden where the first light touched the jasmine. "I have faltered," he confessed, his voice low, "and Atherat's warning haunts me. I vowed to offer her tribute, but in our joy, I neglected it." Huria took his hands, her touch steadying him. "Then we will make it right," she said. "Let us offer the tribute now, with all of Khubur's heart, and seek Atherat's forgiveness." Keret nodded, his resolve renewed, and together they planned a new offering, a chest of gold and silver to be laid at Atherat's altar, a plea for mercy and continued favor. As the sun rose, the priests were summoned, and the people gathered once more. The altar was prepared, its stones gleaming with oil, its cedar fires burning bright. Keret and Huria stood together, their hands joined, their voices united in prayer. "Atherat, mother of creation, Keret intoned. "Forgive my lapse and accept this gift, that Khubur and Udum may remain under your light." The chest was opened, its treasures glinting in the sun, and the priests poured wine upon the earth, sealing the offering. The air grew still, the scent of cedar and jasmine mingling, and a soft breeze swept through the square, a sign that Atharat had heard. Yet in Keret's heart, a shadow lingered, a whisper of doubt that the goddess's forgiveness might come at a price. For now, Khubur stood strong, its people united, its queen a light in the darkness. But the gods were ever watchful, and their will was a tide that could lift or drown. Sleep now, dear listener, as the gardens of Khubur cradle you in their embrace. Let the scent of jasmine, the glow of the stars, carry you into dreams where love and divine will weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens. The city of Khubur basked in a golden season, its fields heavy with grain, its markets alive with the hum of trade, and its people warmed by the light of their king and queen. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the stone walls with hues of amber and rose, while the air carried the scent of ripened figs and the distant salt of the great sea. King Keret and Queen Huria ruled with a harmony that seemed to echo the will of the gods, their union a beacon that drew the people together like stars to a constellation. The palace, once shadowed by grief, now rang with laughter, its halls adorned with tapestries woven in crimson and blue, their threads telling tales of renewal and hope. Yet beneath this radiant surface, a shadow stirred, a whisper of divine displeasure that crept into the heart of the king. Keret had honored his vow to Atharat, or so he believed. The chest of gold and silver, offered with prayers and wine, had been laid at her altar, the cedar fires burning bright under the watchful eyes of Khubur's priests. The breeze that followed, soft and scented with jasmine, had seemed a sign of forgiveness, a blessing from the mother of creation. But the gods were not so easily appeased, their memories long and their justice exacting. Atharat, whose eyes saw beyond the veil of mortal time, had noted the delay in Keret's tribute, the moment of forgetfulness amidst his joy. Her warning, spoken in the dream that had haunted him, lingered like a storm cloud on the edge of his heart. "Keep your vows, or the sands will swallow your dreams." The first signs came subtly, like a breeze that chills before the tempest. Keret awoke one morning with a heaviness in his limbs, a weariness that clung to him despite the restful night. His eyes, once bright as twilight, were dimmed by a faint haze, and his breath came shorter, as if the air itself resisted him. He stood before the mirror in his chamber, its polished bronze reflecting a face that seemed to age before its time, the lines of his brow deeper, his skin paler than the sunlit stone of Khubur. He said nothing to Huria, unwilling to burden her with his fears, but her gaze, sharp with the wisdom of Udum's daughters, missed little. The city, unaware of its king's struggle, continued to thrive. The harvests were bountiful, the sea yielded its treasures, and the people sang hymns to El and Atharat, their voices rising like waves to the heavens. Huria moved among them, her presence a balm to their hearts. She oversaw the weaving of new banners, their threads gleaming with symbols of unity, and she joined the priests in their rituals, pouring wine upon the altars with a grace that seemed to summon the gods themselves. Yet in the quiet moments, when the palace grew still and the stars held sway, she watched Keret, her heart sensing the shadow that grew within him. One evening, as they walked through the gardens where fountains sang and oleanders bloomed, Huria took his hand, her touch warm and steady. "Keret," she said, her voice soft as the night breeze, "your steps are heavy, and your eyes carry a weight you do not speak. Share it with me, for we are bound by vows stronger than stone." Keret hesitated, his gaze tracing the stars, then spoke, his voice low and threaded with fear. "A shadow has fallen upon me, Huria. My strength falters, my breath grows thin, and I fear Atherat's wrath. I offered her tribute, but too late, and now her curse stirs within me. Hurriya's eyes darkened, not with fear but with resolve. The gods are just, but they are also merciful, she said. We will seek their favor again with offerings and prayers and ask for Atherat's forgiveness. You are not alone, Keret, and Khubur will stand with you. Her words were a light in the gathering dusk, and Keret felt a spark of hope, though the weight in his chest remained. The next dawn, Hurriya summoned Elim, the high priest, to the temple of El. The air was cool, scented with cedar and myrrh, and the great bull statue stood sentinel, its obsidian eyes gleaming with an ancient wisdom. Elim, his white beard flowing like a river, listened as Hurriya spoke of Keret's ailment and the fear of Atherat's curse. The mother of creation is stern, but not without mercy, he said, his voice a low chant. We must offer a greater tribute, one that shows the depth of our devotion. Let the people join in prayer, and let the altars burn with the finest gifts of Khubur. The city was called to a new ritual, one of supplication and renewal. Altars were raised in every square, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people brought their finest offerings, jars of wine, as red as the dawn, baskets of pomegranates, and lambs whose wool was soft as clouds. Hurriya, clad in a gown of white and silver, stood beside Keret, whose crimson robe seemed to dim against his paling skin. Together, they led the procession to the great temple, their hands joined, their voices united in a hymn that rose like smoke to the heavens. Elim and the priest chanted, their words a plea for mercy. Atherat, mother of all, forgive the lapse of your servant. Elim intoned, pouring wine upon the altar, its stream soaking into the earth. El, father of creation, shield your son with your light, Hurriya added, her voice steady as she scattered petals of saffron that fluttered like tiny flames. A bull, its horns adorned with gold, was offered, its blood a sacred seal, and the cedar fires burned high, their smoke curling upward like a prayer. The people watched, their breaths held, as the ritual unfolded. The air grew still, the scent of myrrh and saffron mingling, and a soft breeze swept through the temple, a sign that the gods had heard. Yet Keret's weakness grew, his steps faltering as he returned to the palace. Hurriya, her heart heavy, stayed by his side, her presence a quiet strength. She ordered the healers to attend him, their hands skilled with herbs and oils, but their remedies brought little relief. The shadow of Atherat's curse deepened, a tide that threatened to pull Keret under. In the quiet of the night, as the stars of Khubur shone like lanterns, Hurriya knelt beside Keret's bed, her hand resting on his. We will face this together, she whispered, her voice a lullaby that eased his restless heart. The gods have bound us, and their will is not yet done. Keret, his breath shallow, managed a faint smile, drawing strength from her resolve. But in his dreams, the ocean roared, and Atherat's voice echoed, her words a storm that shook his soul. Your vow was late, and my justice is sure. The days that followed were a balance of light and shadow. Khubur's prosperity held, its people unaware of their king's struggle, their songs of praise rising to the gods. Hurriya took on more duties, her wisdom guiding the councils, her grace calming the fears of the nobles. She ordered new altars built, their fires burning day and night, and sent messengers to Udum, seeking Pabil's counsel and the prayers of his priests. Yet Keret's illness grew, his strength fading like a star before the dawn, and the people began to whisper, their voices tinged with fear that the gods had turned their gaze away. As the moon rose, full and silver, Hurriya stood on the palace balcony, her eyes tracing the heavens. Atherat, hear us, she prayed, her voice soft as the night. Spare him, and let Khubur's light endure." The stars seemed to pulse, a faint answer, but the shadow of the curse remained, a reminder that the god's will was a river with depths unseen. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their light. Let the scent of myrrh, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and divine justice weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the shadows of destiny. The twilight over Khubur was a tapestry of indigo and gold, the sky a canvas where the stars began to whisper their ancient tales. The city, once vibrant with the joy of Keret and Hurriya's union, now bore a quiet unease, like a melody played in a minor key. The air was heavy with the scent of cedar smoke and wilting jasmine, as if the earth itself sensed the shadow that had fallen upon its king. The fields remained bountiful, the markets hummed with trade, but the people's laughter was softer, their gazes turning toward the palace where King Keret lay, his strength fading like a flame in a gathering storm. Queen Hurriya, her presence a beacon of light, moved through the city with unwavering resolve. Yet her heart carried the weight of her husband's suffering and the fear of a divine curse unyielding in its grip. Keret's illness had deepened, a relentless tide that drained his vitality with each passing day. His once steady hands trembled as he reached for a goblet. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his eyes, once bright as twilight, were clouded with a fever that no healer could name. The palace, with its marble halls and tapestries of crimson and blue, felt colder now, its echoes no longer filled with laughter, but with the hushed voices of attendants and priests. Keret, confined to his chamber, lay upon a bed of cedar. It sent a faint reminder of the altars he had raised to the gods. Yet the offerings to Atheret, the jars of wine and treasures of gold, seemed to have fallen short, and the goddess's wrath clung to him like a shadow cast by an unseen star. Hurriya, her gown of white linen glowing softly in the lamplight, rarely left his side. She bathed his brow with water infused with herbs, her hands steady despite the ache in her heart. She spoke to him of Khubur's fields, of the children who played in the squares, of the sea that sparkled under the sun, her voice a lullaby that eased his restless spirit. Yet she saw the truth in his eyes, the fear that Atherat's curse was a debt unpaid, a vow broken in the haste of joy. "We will find a way," she whispered, her words a vow of their own. "The gods have bound us, and they will not abandon us now." The people of Khubur, though still loyal, began to murmur. In the markets, where merchants once sang of prosperity, voices spoke of immense a flock of birds that fled the city at dawn, a spring that ran dry under a full moon. The elders gathered in the temple of El, their faces etched with worry, and the priests burned cedar fires day and night, their chants rising like a plea to pierce the heavens. Elim, the high priest, his white beard trembling as he spoke, warned that Atherat's anger was a storm that could sweep Khubur into shadow. "The king's lapse was a wound to the goddess," he said, his voice low and grave. "We must seek her mercy with offerings greater than before, or the light of Khubur will fade." Hurriya took charge, her wisdom a steady hand guiding the city through its fear. She ordered new altars built, their stones gathered from the hills where the god's presence lingered. The people brought their finest gifts, jars of oil, pressed from ancient olives, baskets of pomegranates glowing like rubies, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Hurriya herself led the rituals, her voice clear as she stood before the great altar in the temple, her gown catching the firelight like a star. "Atheret, mother of creation," she intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson streams soaking into the earth. "Hear our plea, forgive our king, and restore the light you have given us." The priests chanted, their voices a chorus that seemed to weave the air itself, and the people joined, their prayers rising like smoke to the heavens. A bull, its horns adorned with silver, was offered, its blood a sacred seal, and the cedar fires burned high, their scent filling the temple with a warmth that promised hope. Yet as the ritual ended, a chill wind swept through the city, rattling the banners and dimming the flames. The people fell silent, their eyes searching the sky, and Horiah felt a pang of dread, as if Atharat's gaze was stern and unyielding. In the palace, Keret's condition worsened. His fever burned hotter, his breath a labored whisper, and his dreams were haunted by visions of crashing waves and Atharat's voice. Her words a thunder that shook his soul. "Your vow was late, and my justice is sure." Horiah, desperate for answers, sent messengers to Udum, seeking her father Pabil's counsel and the wisdom of his priests. She consulted Khubur's healers, who brewed potions of myrrh and thyme, but their remedies brought no relief. In the quiet of the night, she knelt before a small shrine to El, its bull carving glowing faintly in the lamplight, and prayed for a sign, a path to save her husband and their city. As the moon rose, full and silver, a strange light flickered in the temple courtyard, a soft glow like the pulse of a distant star. Elim, summoned by a young priest, hurried to the scene, his staff tapping the stones with urgency. There, in the center of the courtyard, a figure appeared, a woman cloaked in white, her form shimmering as if woven from moonlight. Her eyes were bright, her presence both gentle and commanding, and the priests fell to their knees, sensing the divine. "Shatiqatu comes," Elim whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "The healer of the gods, sent by El to mend what Atharat has broken." Horiah, alerted by the priests, rushed to the courtyard, her heart racing with hope. The figure of Shatiqatu stood silent, her gaze fixed on the palace where Keret lay. She spoke no words, but the air around her hummed with power, scented with myrrh and the faint tang of the sea. Horiah approached, her hands clasped in reverence. "Great Shatiqatu, if you are sent by El, save my husband, our king, and lift the curse that darkens Khubur." The figure's eyes softened, and a faint breeze stirred, carrying a warmth that eased Horiah's fear. But Shatiqatu's presence was a promise, not yet a cure. The goddess turned, her form fading into the moonlight, leaving only a whisper. "Prepare the way, for healing comes with dawn." The priest, stirred by the vision, began new chants, their voices a tide that filled the night. Horiah returned to Keret's side, her heart buoyed by hope, yet tempered by the knowledge that the god's aid came at a price. She sat by his bed, her hand resting on his, and spoke softly of the light she had seen, of the promise of Shatiqatu's coming. The people, hearing of the divine visitor, gathered in the squares, their fear mingled with hope. They lit lamps in their homes, their glow a constellation of faith, and sang hymns to El, their voices a plea for mercy. Yet the shadow of Atharat's curse lingered, and whispers of unrest grew among the nobles, some questioning whether Keret's illness was a sign of divine disfavor, a crack in the foundation of Khubur's prosperity. As the night deepened, Horiah stood on the palace balcony, her eyes tracing the stars. "El, Father of all, send your healer to us," she prayed, her voice a whisper in the dark. The stars seemed to pulse, a faint answer, but the weight of the curse remained, a tide that threatened to pull Khubur under. Keret, in his fevered sleep, stirred, his lips forming a silent prayer, and Horiah held his hand, her love a light in the gathering shadow. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrrh, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where divine mercy and mortal love weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the shadows of destiny. The dawn over Khubur broke with a stillness that seemed to hold the breath of the world, the sky a canvas of rose and gold, its edges softened by a mist that clung to the hills. The air was heavy with the scent of cedar smoke and dew-kissed oleander, a quiet promise of divine presence lingering in the city's heart. The people of Khubur, their faces etched with hope and fear, gathered in the temple courtyard, their eyes fixed on the palace where King Keret lay, his life a fragile thread in the hands of the gods. Queen Hurriya, her white linen gown glowing like moonlight, stood at the center of the gathering, her presence a beacon of strength amidst the shadow of Atherat's curse. The vision of Shatiqatu, the divine healer sent by El, had kindled a spark of hope, and now, as the sun rose, the city waited for her mercy to unfold. Keret's illness had woven a dark veil over Khubur, his fever burning like a fire that no healer could quench, his breath a whisper that seemed to fade with each passing hour. The palace, once alive with the joy of his union with Hurriya, was now a place of hushed voices and flickering lamps, its marble halls echoing with the weight of a king's suffering. Hurriya, her heart a fortress of resolve, had not left his side, her hands bathing his brow with herb-infused water, her voice a lullaby that held back the tide of despair. Yet the people's murmurs grew louder, their faith shaken by the Omensa spring gone dry, birds fleeing at dawn that whispered of divine disfavor. The appearance of Shatiqatu in the temple courtyard had been a sign, a light in the darkness that promised salvation. The priests, led by Elim, had prepared the city for her return, raising altars of polished stone and cedar, their surfaces anointed with oil that gleamed like liquid starlight. The people brought offerings jars of wine as red as the dawn, baskets of pomegranates, and doves whose wings shimmered like pearls. Hurriya, her eyes bright with determination, stood before the great altar, her voice a steady melody as she called upon the gods. El, Father of all, send your healer to us, she prayed, her words rising like smoke. Shatiqatu, bearer of divine mercy, lift the curse that shadows our king. As the sun reached its zenith, the air in the courtyard grew warm, scented with myrrh and the faint tang of the sea. A soft glow appeared, like the pulse of a star, and Shatiqatu emerged, her form cloaked in white, her presence a harmony of power and grace. Her eyes, bright as the morning, rested on Hurriya, and her voice, though soft, carried the weight of divine will. Daughter of Udum, she said, your faith has called me, and El's mercy has sent me. Lead me to the king, and let the curse of Atherat be undone. The crowd parted, their breaths held, as Hurriya led Shatiqatu to the palace. The healer's steps were silent, her cloak trailing like moonlight on water, and the air around her hummed with a power that seemed to still the very winds. In Keret's chamber, the king lay pale and still, his breath a faint thread, his eyes closed in a fevered sleep. Hurriya knelt beside him, her hand resting on his, her heart a prayer. Shatiqatu stood at the foot of the bed, her hands raised, and began to chant, her voice a melody that wove through the air like a river of light. The ritual was a dance of divine power, its rhythm ancient and sure. Shatiqatu scattered petals of saffron and myrtle, their fragrance filling the chamber, and poured water from a silver jar, its droplets sparkling as they fell upon Keret's brow. She spoke words known only to the gods, their cadence a tide that seemed to pull the curse from his body. The air grew warm, the scent of myrrh intensifying, and a soft glow enveloped Keret, like the embrace of a dawn yet to break. Hurriya watched, her heart pounding, as color returned to her husband's face, his breath growing stronger, his eyes fluttering open to meet hers. Keret, Hurriya whispered, her voice trembling with relief. The gods have heard us. Keret, his gaze clearing, managed a faint smile, his hand tightening around hers. Shatiqatu has come, he murmured, his voice weak but steady, and El's mercy endures. The healer, her task complete, stepped back, her form fading into the light, leaving only a whisper. Honor the gods, for their gifts are fragile. The chamber was silent, save for the soft flicker of lamps, and Huria felt a weight lift, though a shadow of caution remained in her heart. The news of Keret's recovery spread through Khubur like wildfire, igniting joy in the streets. The people gathered in the squares, their voices rising in hymns of praise to El and Shatiqatu, their lamps burning bright under the stars. The fields seemed to bloom anew, the sea sparkled with promise, and the city's heart beat with renewed vigor. Keret, though still weak, rose from his bed, his crimson robes restored to their former glory, and stood beside Huria on the palace balcony, their presence a symbol of hope reborn. The people cheered, their voices a tide that washed away the fear of the past days. Yet beneath the celebration, a murmur of discontent stirred among the nobles. In the shadowed halls of the palace, where tapestries hung heavy with the weight of history, whispers spoke of Keret's illness as a sign of weakness, a crack in the divine mandate that had crowned him. Among them was Yassib, Keret's eldest son, born in the early days of his union with Huria, a youth whose eyes burned with ambition and whose heart chafed at his father's faltering strength. Yassib, tall and broad-shouldered, stood among the nobles, his voice low but sharp, questioning whether Keret, touched by Atharat's curse, could still lead Khubur. Huria, ever watchful, sensed the growing unrest. She moved among the nobles, her wisdom a steady hand, her words calming their fears. "The gods have restored our king," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "and Khubur stands strong under their light." Yet she saw the spark in Yassib's eyes, a fire that promised trouble, and her heart grew heavy with the knowledge that the gods' mercy was a fragile gift. Keret too felt the undercurrent, though his strength was returning. He walked with Huria through the gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed, and spoke of his fears. "The gods have spared me," he said, his voice soft, "but their will is a river, with depths unseen. Yassib's heart turns from me, and I fear the shadow of Atharat lingers." Huria took his hand, her touch a steady anchor. "We will face this together," she said. "Let us honor the gods with new offerings, and guide Yassib with love and wisdom." The city prepared for another ritual, a thanksgiving for Keret's recovery. Altars were raised, their cedar fires burning bright, and the people brought gifts of wine and grain. Keret and Huria stood together, their voices united in prayer, but the nobles' whispers grew, a tide that threatened to erode the unity of Khubur. Yassib watched from the shadows, his heart a storm of ambition and doubt, the seeds of rebellion taking root. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Huria stood on the balcony, her eyes tracing the heavens. "El, keep us in your light," she prayed, her voice a whisper in the night. The city slept, its heart beating with hope, but the shadow of unrest lingered, a reminder that the gods' will was a path both bright and perilous. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrrh, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where divine mercy and mortal ambition weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The sun rose over Khubur with a gentle warmth, its golden rays weaving through the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops, casting long shadows that danced like whispers of the past. The air was fragrant with the scent of blooming myrtle, and the faint salt of the great sea carried on a breeze that seemed to hum with the promise of renewal. King Keret, restored by the divine touch of Shatiqatu, stood once more at the heart of his city, his crimson and blue robes glowing like a sunset over the hills. Beside him, Queen Huria, her gown of white linen shimmering like moonlight, moved with a grace that steadied the hearts of their people. Yet beneath the surface of Khubur's prosperity, a quiet discord stirred, a shadow cast by ambition and the lingering gaze of the gods. Keret's recovery had brought a new dawn to Khubur. The markets bustled with merchants trading amber and lapis, their voices bright with confidence. The fields yielded harvests so abundant that the granaries overflowed, and the sea sparkled with fish that filled the nets of every fisherman. The people sang hymns to El and Shatiqatu, their voices rising like waves to the heavens. And the temple fires burned bright, their cedar smoke a testament to divine mercy. Keret, his strength returning, walked among his people, his presence a pillar of hope, his laughter a melody that echoed through the squares. Huriya, ever his partner, guided the councils with wisdom, her words soothing the fears of the elders and inspiring the young. The palace, once dimmed by Keret's illness, was alive again with light and sound. Tapestries of crimson and gold adorned the halls, their threads telling tales of triumph and unity. Feasts were held, with tables laden with bread, roasted lamb, and jars of wine that glowed like rubies in the torchlight. Keret and Huriya presided together, their hands brushing as they shared a goblet, their smiles a promise of a future unshadowed by grief. The people looked to them with awe, seeing in their union a blessing from El, a light that would guide Khubur through the ages. Yet in the shadowed corners of the palace, where the lamplight flickered and the air grew still, a different tide was rising. Yassib, Keret's eldest son, now a young man with eyes like burning coals and a presence that commanded attention, stood among the nobles, his voice low but sharp. He was tall, his shoulders broad like his father's, but his heart was restless, stirred by ambition and a belief that Keret's illness had weakened his claim to the throne. The nobles, some swayed by Yassib's charisma, whispered of change, questioning whether a king touched by Atharat's curse could lead Khubur into the future. Their words were like seeds scattered on fertile ground, taking root in the quiet spaces of the city. Huriya, her senses attuned to the undercurrents of the court, saw the spark in Yassib's eyes and heard the murmurs of discontent. She moved among the nobles with a quiet authority, her words a balm to their doubts. Keret is restored by El's mercy, she said, her voice clear as a bell in the great hall. His strength is Khubur's strength, and together we honor the gods who guide us. Her presence calmed the nobles, but Yassib's gaze remained unyielding, his silence a storm gathering strength. Keret, too, sensed the growing tension, though his heart was heavy with the joy of his recovery. He spoke with Yassib in the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. "My son," he said, his voice soft yet firm, "you are the light of my house, the heir to Khubur's throne. Stand with me, and let us build a legacy that honors the gods." Yassib bowed, his expression respectful, but his eyes betrayed a fire that burned beyond his father's reach. "I will serve Khubur," he replied, his words measured. But Keret felt a chill, as if the shadow of Atharat lingered in his son's heart. To strengthen the city's unity, Huriya proposed a grand festival to celebrate Keret's restoration and reaffirm their devotion to the gods. The people embraced the idea, their hands busy with preparations. Altars were raised in every square, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. Women wove garlands of laurel and saffron, their petals bright as the dawn, while merchants brought gifts of wine, grain, and honey to honor El and Atharat. The priests, led by Elim, chanted hymns that wove through the air like threads of light, and the city pulsed with a shared purpose. The festival began at dawn, the air alive with the scent of cedar smoke and blooming flowers. Keret and Huriya stood before the great altar in the temple of El, their hands joined, their voices united in prayer. "To El, Father of all, we offer our thanks," Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. To Atherat, mother of creation, we renew our vows, Huria added, scattering petals of myrtle that fluttered like butterflies. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. The people joined in the celebration, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to call the stars themselves to witness. Dancers spun in the squares, their robes a blur of crimson and gold, while children laughed, their hands filled with flowers. Yet among the nobles, Yassib stood apart, his eyes scanning the crowd, his thoughts a secret tide. He spoke quietly with his allies, young warriors and ambitious elders, their words cloaked in the noise of the festival. Khubur needs strength, he whispered, a king untouched by the god's wrath. His words were soft, but they spread like ripples, sowing doubt in the hearts of those who listened. Huria, ever vigilant, noticed Yassib's distance and the glances he shared with the nobles. She drew him aside, her voice gentle but firm. Yassib, you are Khubur's future, she said, her eyes meeting his. Your father's strength is restored, and the gods have blessed us. Stand with us, and let us honor their will together. Yassib's smile was polite, but his eyes were a storm, and Huria felt a pang of unease, knowing that his ambition was a fire that could not be easily quenched. That night, as the festival continued under a sky ablaze with stars, Keret dreamed again. The air in his chamber grew warm, scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea, and the veil between worlds parted. He stood upon a hill overlooking Khubur, its lights glowing like a constellation fallen to earth. El appeared, his form vast and radiant, his voice a melody that soothed the soul. Keret, my son, he said, your life is restored, but the path ahead is shadowed. Guard your house, for ambition stirs where love should reign. The vision faded, and Keret awoke, his heart heavy with the weight of divine warning. He sought Huria in the garden, where the jasmine bloomed and the fountains sang. El has spoken, he said, his voice low, and I fear Yassib's heart turns from us. The gods have given us light, but their will is a river with depths unseen. Huria took his hand, her touch a steady anchor. We will guide him with love and wisdom, she said, and we will honor the gods with our every step. Her words were a light in the darkness, but the shadow of Yassib's ambition loomed, a tide that threatened to break the unity of Khubur. As the stars shone over the city, their light a gentle guide, Huria stood on the palace balcony, her eyes tracing the heavens. El, keep our house in your light, she prayed, her voice a whisper in the night. The festival continued, its joy a fragile shield against the growing discord, and Khubur stood at a crossroads, its fate woven by the hands of gods and mortals alike. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrtle, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and ambition weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The twilight over Khubur was a delicate veil of indigo and silver, the stars emerging like lanterns to guide the dreams of the city. The air carried the scent of cedar smoke and fading jasmine, a soft reminder of the sacred fires that burned in the temples. The streets, once alive with the joy of Keret's restoration, now hummed with a quiet tension, as if the stones themselves sensed the rift growing within the heart of the royal house. King Keret, his strength bolstered by Shatiqatu's divine touch, stood tall in his crimson and blue robes, his presence a pillar of hope. Beside him, Queen Huria, her white linen gown glowing like moonlight, moved with a grace that held the city together. Yet the shadow of discord, cast by their son Yassib's ambition, loomed like a storm on the horizon, threatening to unravel the unity of Khubur. Keret's reign had flourished since his recovery. the fields blooming with wheat and barley, the sea yielding bountiful catches, and the markets vibrant with trade. The people sang hymns to El and Shatiqatu, their voices rising like waves to the heavens, and the temple fires burned bright, their cedar smoke a testament to divine favor. Horia's wisdom guided the councils, her words soothing the elders and inspiring the young, while Keret's steady hand restored confidence in his rule. The palace, adorned with tapestries of crimson and gold, echoed with the laughter of feasts, a fragile harmony that masked the growing unrest among the nobles. Yassib, Keret's eldest son, had grown into a young man of striking presence, his eyes burning with a fire that rivaled the sun, his voice carrying the weight of one born to lead. Yet his heart was restless, stirred by the memory of his father's illness and the whispers of nobles who saw weakness in a king touched by Athirat's curse. Yassib believed Khubur needed a new strength, a ruler untainted by divine wrath, and his ambition had taken root, fed by the murmurs of his allies. In the shadowed halls of the palace, where the lamplight flickered, he gathered his supporters, young warriors eager for glory. Elders wary of Keret's faltering pastand spoke of a future where Khubur would rise under his hand. The tension broke one evening in the great hall, where a feast was held to honor the harvest. The air was warm with the scent of roasted lamb and pomegranate wine, the lyres weaving a melody that softened the edges of the night. Keret and Huria presided, their hands brushing as they shared a goblet, their smiles a beacon to the gathered nobles. Yassib sat among his allies, his expression calm but his eyes alight with purpose. As the feast reached its height, he rose, his voice cutting through the music like a blade through silk. "Father, King of Khubur," Yassib began, his tone respectful yet sharp, "your reign has brought us prosperity, but your illness was a sign. The gods turned their gaze from you, and Khubur faltered. I am your son, born to carry your legacy, but I say the throne needs strength, unshadowed by divine wrath. Step aside and let me lead, that Khubur may stand tall under a new dawn." The hall fell silent, the lyres stilled, the noble's eyes wide with shock. Keret's face remained steady, though a flicker of pain crossed his eyes, a wound deeper than any curse. Huria's hand tightened on his, her gaze fixed on Yassib, her heart a storm of love and fear. The people waited, their breaths held, as the weight of the moment settled like dust after a storm. Keret rose, his crimson robes catching the torchlight, his voice calm but resonant, like a river flowing over stone. "Yassib, my son," he said, "your heart is bold, but your words wound deeper than a spear. The gods restored me through Shatiqatu's hand, and El's light guides Khubur. The throne is not a prize to be claimed, but a burden to be borne with wisdom. Return to your place, and let us honor the gods together." Yassib's eyes burned, his jaw set, but he bowed, his silence a storm held in check. The nobles murmured, some nodding in loyalty to Keret, others whispering in support of Yassib's claim. Huria, her wisdom a steady hand, rose to speak, her voice a melody that soothed the tension. "Yassib, you are Khubur's future," she said, her eyes meeting his with a mother's love. "But your father's reign is blessed by El, and our unity is our strength. Let us stand together, as a family and a city, under the gods' gaze." Her words calmed the hall, the lyres resuming their song, but the rift remained, a crack in the foundation of Khubur. Yassib retreated to his allies, his ambition unquelled, his heart a fire that burned beyond his parents' reach. The nobles' whispers grew, spreading through the city like ripples on a still pool, and the people began to question, their faith shaken by the specter of division. That night, Keret and Huria walked through the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. The air was cool, the sky a tapestry of light, but Keret's heart was heavy. Yassib's words cut deeper than any curse. He said, his voice low, I fear the gods test us still, and Khubur's light hangs in the balance. Huria took his hand, her touch a steady anchor. We will guide him with love, she said, and seek the gods' wisdom to heal this rift. El and Athrat watch, and their will is not yet done. To restore unity, Huria proposed a ritual to reaffirm Khubur's devotion to the gods. The city prepared with quiet purpose, raising altars of polished stone and cedar, their surfaces anointed with oil that gleamed like starlight. The people brought offerings jars of wine, baskets of figs, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret and Huria stood before the great altar in the temple of El, their hands joined, their voices united in prayer. El, Father of all, guide our house, Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the stones. Athirat, Mother of creation, heal our hearts, Huria added, scattering petals of myrtle that fluttered like tiny flames. The priests chanted, their voices a tide that wove through the air, and the people joined, their prayers rising like smoke to the heavens. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. Yet as the ritual ended, a shadow passed over the temple, a cloud that dimmed the sun for a fleeting moment. The crowd stirred, their murmurs rising, and Elim, the high priest, raised his staff, his voice grave. The gods watch, he said, and their will is a river with depths unseen. Unity must prevail, or Khubur will falter. Yassib stood among the crowd, his eyes fixed on the altar, his heart a storm of ambition and doubt. He spoke no further challenge, but his silence was a promise of unrest, a tide that threatened to break. Huria, her senses sharp, saw the fire in his gaze and knew the rift could not be easily mended. She resolved to speak with him alone, to guide him with a mother's love. But the weight of his ambition pressed against her heart. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Keret stood on the palace balcony, his eyes tracing the heavens. El, keep my son in your light, he prayed, his voice a whisper in the night. Huria joined him, her hand resting on his, her presence a steady flame. The city slept, its heart beating with hope, but the shadow of Yassib's rebellion lingered, a reminder that the gods' will was a path both bright and perilous. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrtle, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and ambition clash under the watchful eyes of the gods, weaving the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur unfurled like a silken banner, its rose and amber hues softening the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops, casting a gentle glow that seemed to cradle the world in peace. The air was fragrant with the scent of myrtle and the faint salt of the great sea, carried on a breeze that whispered of divine watchfulness. Yet beneath this serene veil, Khubur trembled with a quiet unrest, its heart torn by the rift between King Keret and his son Yassib. The palace, once a beacon of unity, now echoed with the murmurs of divided loyalties, and the people's hymns to El and Atharat were tinged with a plea for harmony. Queen Huria, her white linen gown shimmering like moonlight, moved through the city with a steady grace, her heart set on mending the fracture, while Keret, his crimson robes a symbol of his enduring strength, struggled to hold the throne under the gods' unyielding gaze. Keret's reign, restored by Shatiqatu's divine touch, had brought a season of prosperity. The fields bloomed with golden wheat, the markets bustled with trade, and the sea sparkled with abundant catches. The people, their faith renewed, raised altars of cedar and stone, their fires burning bright with offerings of wine and grain. Yet Yassib's challenge in the great hall had cast a shadow. his words a spark that ignited doubt among the nobles. His ambition, once a quiet fire, now blazed openly, fueled by allies who saw in him a vision of strength untainted by the curse that had touched his father. The city stood at a crossroads, its fate a delicate thread in the hands of gods and mortals. Huriya, her wisdom a guiding star, sought to bridge the divide. She summoned Yassib to the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the midday sun. The air was warm, scented with the sweetness of flowers and the faint tang of the sea, and the world seemed to pause, as if the gods themselves listened. "Yassib, my son," she said, her voice soft yet firm, like a river flowing over smooth stones. "Your heart is bold, but your challenge wounds Khubur. Your father is chosen by El, his strength restored by divine mercy. Stand with us, and let us honor the gods together as a family united." Yassib, his eyes burning with a fire that rivaled the sun, stood tall, his robes of deep blue catching the light. "Mother," he replied, his voice measured but sharp, "I honor you and father, but Khubur needs a king untouched by weakness. The gods tested him, and he faltered. I am born to lead, to carry our city into a new dawn." His words were a tide, unyielding and fierce, and Huriya saw the depth of his ambition, a storm that could not be calmed with words alone. She reached for his hand, her touch a plea, but Yassib stepped back, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his heart set on a path of his own. The rebellion escalated in the days that followed, like a wind gathering strength before a storm. Yassib gathered his allies in the shadowed halls of the palace, where the lamplight flickered and the air grew heavy with whispers. Young warriors, their spears gleaming with the promise of glory, and elders, their eyes clouded with doubt, rallied to his cause. They spoke of Keret's illness as a sign of divine disfavor, of Yassib as the future of Khubur, his youth a symbol of strength unmarred by the past. The murmur spread to the markets, where merchants paused their trade to listen, and to the fields, where farmers whispered of change under the midday sun. Keret, his heart heavy with the weight of his son's defiance, struggled to maintain authority. He stood before the council in the great hall, his crimson robes glowing like a sunset, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "Khubur is blessed by El," he said, his words resonating like a bell. "I have walked through the shadow of Atharat's curse and emerged by divine mercy. Let us stand united, honor the gods, and keep our city strong." The elders nodded, their loyalty steadfast, but the younger nobles shifted, their gazes flickering to Yassib, who stood at the hall's edge, his silence a challenge louder than words. Huriya worked tirelessly to hold the city together, her presence a light in the gathering dusk. She walked among the people, her voice soothing their fears, her hands distributing bread and wine to the poor. She ordered new rituals to appease the gods, raising altars in every square, their cedar fires burning bright with offerings of oil and myrtle. The priests, led by Elim, chanted hymns that wove through the air like threads of light, their voices a plea for unity. "El, Father of all, bind our hearts," Huriya prayed, pouring wine upon the altar, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. "Atharat, Mother of creation, guide us through this storm." Yet the gods remained silent, their will a mystery veiled in starlight. The air grew heavy, the scent of cedar smoke mingling with a faint chill, as if Atharat's gaze lingered, her judgment unresolved. A strange omen appeared one evening. Star fell from the sky, its light streaking across the horizon like a tear. The people gathered in the squares, their murmurs rising, and Elim, his white beard trembling, declared it a sign. "The gods watch," he said, his voice grave, and their will tests the hearts of kings and sons. Khubur must stand as one, or the light will fade. Keret, his strength tested by the growing rift, sought solace in the temple of El, where the great bull statue stood sentinel, its obsidian eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. He knelt before it, his crimson robes pooling like blood on the stone floor, and prayed. El, Father of all, guide my son, he whispered, his voice heavy with sorrow. Let Yassib see the light of your will, and keep Khubur whole. The temple was silent, save for the flicker of lamps, but a warmth touched Keret's heart, as if El's presence lingered. A faint promise of hope. Huria, her heart torn between her husband and her son, sought Yassib once more, this time in the palace courtyard, where the moonlight bathed the stones in silver. Yassib, she said, her voice a lullaby that softened the night, your ambition wounds the heart of Khubur. Your father loves you, and the gods have blessed his reign. Turn from this path, and let us heal our house together. Yassib's eyes softened for a moment, touched by her love, but the fire within him flared. Mother, I seek only Khubur's strength, he said. The gods have shown their doubt in father. I must act, for the city's sake. He turned away, his steps echoing in the courtyard, leaving Huria with a heart heavy with dread. The rebellion grew bolder, Yassib's allies openly challenging Keret's decrees in the council. They questioned his decisions, their voices sharp, and refused to join the rituals, their absence a silent defiance. The people, caught between loyalty to their king and the promise of Yassib's strength, grew divided, their hymns faltering under the weight of uncertainty. Huria stood by Keret, her wisdom a shield, but the rift widened, a tide that threatened to drown Khubur's unity. As the moon rose, full and silver, Keret stood on the palace balcony, his eyes tracing the stars. El, guide us, he prayed, his voice a whisper in the night. Huria joined him, her hand resting on his, her presence a steady flame. The city slept, its heart beating with a fragile hope, but the shadow of Yassib's rebellion loomed, a storm that could break the light of Khubur under the watchful eyes of the gods. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrtle, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and rebellion clash under the divine gaze, weaving the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur unfolded with a fragile grace, its golden light filtering through a veil of mist that clung to the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops. The air was heavy with the scent of myrtle, and the faint tang of the great sea carried on a breeze that seemed a whisper of divine judgment. The streets, once vibrant with unity, now pulsed with a quiet dread, as the rift between King Keret and his son Yassib had grown into a chasm that threatened to swallow Khubur's heart. Queen Huria, her white linen gown glowing like moonlight, stood as a beacon of hope, her wisdom a thread striving to mend the torn fabric of the city. Keret, his crimson and blue robes a symbol of his enduring strength, faced the storm of rebellion with a heavy heart, under the watchful eyes of El and Atharat, whose will hung like a star over the fate of the throne. The city's prosperity, a gift of divine mercy, had not faded. The fields bloomed with golden wheat, the markets hummed with trade, and the sea sparkled with abundant catches. Yet the people's hymns to El were softer now, their voices tinged with fear as Yassib's rebellion gathered strength. His allies' young warriors hungry for glory and elders swayed by doubt had grown bold, openly defying Keret's decrees in the council and rallying support in the squares. Yassib, his eyes burning with ambition, believed himself chosen to lead Khubur into a new era, his youth a fire untainted by the curse that had touched his father. The city stood on the edge of fracture, its fate a delicate balance in the hands of gods and mortals. Huria, Her heart, torn between love for her husband and her son, made one final effort to prevent open conflict. She sought Yassib in the palace courtyard, where the moonlight bathed the stones in silver and the fountains sang a mournful tune. Yassib, she said, her voice a melody that softened the night, your ambition wounds Khubur's heart. Your father is chosen by El, restored by Shatiqatu's hand. Turn from this path, and let us stand as one under the god's light. Yassib's gaze wavered, touched by her love, but his jaw set with resolve. Mother, I seek only Khubur's strength, he said, his voice sharp as a blade. The gods tested father and found him wanting. I must claim the throne, for the city's sake. He turned away, his steps echoing like thunder, leaving Huria with a heart heavy with dread. The rebellion reached its climax in the great hall, where the nobles gathered under the flickering light of oil lamps, their robes a cascade of crimson and gold. The air was warm with the scent of cedar and wine, but the tension was a tangible weight, pressing against the walls adorned with tapestries of Khubur's history. Keret and Huria stood at the dais, their hands joined, their presence a symbol of unity. Yassib entered, flanked by his allies, his blue robes gleaming, his eyes alight with a fire that challenged the throne. The hall fell silent, the lyres stilled as the young prince stepped forward, his voice ringing like a bell. Father, King of Khubur, Yassib declared, his tone bold yet edged with respect. Your reign has brought us prosperity, but your illness was a sign of divine disfavor. The gods demand strength, and I am ready to lead. Step aside, and let me take the throne, that Khubur may rise unshadowed by the past. His words were a storm, shaking the hearts of all who heard, and the nobles stirred, their murmurs a tide of divided loyalties. Keret rose, his crimson robes catching the torchlight, his face etched with sorrow but resolute. Yassib, my son, he said, his voice steady as stone, your heart is bold, but your challenge betrays the gods who restored me. El chose me, and Shatiqatu lifted the curse of Atharat. The throne is not yours to claim while I live. Return to your place, and let us honor the divine will together. His words were a plea wrapped in authority, but Yassib's eyes burned, unyielding, and the hall trembled with the weight of their clash. Huria stepped forward, her voice a soothing melody that sought to calm the storm. Yassib, you are Khubur's future, she said, her eyes meeting his with a mother's love. But your father's reign is blessed by El. Let us stand as one, or the god's wrath will fall upon us all. Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread, but Yassib shook his head, his allies rallying behind him. The gods have spoken through me, he said, and Khubur will follow. The nobles split, some standing with Keret, others with Yassib, and the city's heart fractured under the weight of rebellion. As the confrontation reached its peak, the air grew heavy, the scent of cedar smoke intensifying, and a sudden gust swept through the hall, extinguishing the lamps. The crowd gasped, and a silver light pulsed at the center of the dais, like the heartbeat of a star. A figure appeared, cloaked in radiance, its form vast and serene, a father of all his presence, a tide that stilled the storm. His voice, a melody that wove through the air, spoke to all. Khubur is my chosen city, and Keret my anointed king. Yassib, your heart is bold, but your challenge defies my will. Return to your father's side, or the light of Khubur will dim. Yassib fell to his knees, his eyes wide with awe and fear, his ambition humbled by the divine presence. The nobles bowed, their murmurs silenced, and the hall was filled with a warmth that promised mercy. El's form faded, leaving a soft glow that lingered like a promise, and the air was scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea. Keret, his heart heavy with both relief and sorrow, stepped forward, offering his hand to Yassib. My son, he said, his voice soft. Let us heal this rift and honor the gods together. Yassib, his fire dimmed, took his father's hand, his voice trembling. Father, I yield. Forgive my folly. Hurriah, her eyes bright with tears, embraced them both, her presence a bridge between father and son. The nobles cheered, their voices a tide of unity, and the lyres resumed, their melody weaving a tapestry of hope. Yet in Keret's heart a shadow lingered, a whisper of Atharat's unresolved judgment, a reminder that the god's mercy was a fragile gift. The city, though united, bore the scars of rebellion, and the people's hymns were tinged with caution, their faith tested by the storm they had weathered. To seal the reconciliation, Keret and Hurriah ordered a ritual of thanksgiving. Altars were raised in the temple courtyard, their cedar fires burning bright, their stones anointed with oil that gleamed like starlight. The people brought offerings jars of wine, baskets of figs, and doves, whose wings shimmered like pearls. Keret, Hurriah, and Yassib stood together, their voices united in prayer. El, Father of all, we thank you for your light, Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the altar. Atharat, Mother of creation, guide our hearts, Hurriah added, scattering petals of myrtle. The crowd joined, their chants rising like smoke, and a soft breeze swept through, a sign of divine favor. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Keret stood on the palace balcony, his hand resting on Hurriah's, Yassib at their side. The gods have spared us, he said, his voice a whisper in the night. But their will is a river with depths unseen. Hurriah nodded, her presence a steady flame, and Yassib, his heart humbled, vowed to serve. The city slept, its heart beating with fragile hope, but the shadow of divine judgment lingered, a tide that could yet rise. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of myrrh, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where divine mercy and mortal strife weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur rose with a tender grace, its golden light spilling across the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops like a gentle caress from the heavens. The air was fragrant with the scent of blooming laurel and the faint salt of the great sea, carried on a breeze that whispered of reconciliation and hope. The streets, once shadowed by the storm of Yassib's rebellion, now hummed with a cautious optimism, as if the city itself sought to heal the wounds of division. King Keret, his crimson and blue robes glowing like a sunset, stood as a pillar of restored authority, his heart steadied by the divine intervention of El. Beside him, Queen Hurriah, her white linen gown shimmering like moonlight, moved with a quiet strength, her wisdom a thread weaving the city back together. Yet the shadow of Atharat's judgment lingered, a subtle tide beneath the surface, reminding all of the gods' unyielding gaze. The aftermath of Yassib's rebellion had left Khubur tender, like a field after a storm, its roots intact but its surface scarred. The people, their faith renewed by El's presence in the great hall, returned to their daily rhythms, their hands busy with trade and harvest. The fields bloomed with wheat and barley, the markets bustled with merchants trading amber and lapis, and the sea sparkled with fish that filled the nets. Hymns to El and Shatiqatu rose from the temples, their cedar fires burning bright, their smoke curling upward like prayers. Yet whispers of the rebellion lingered, soft but persistent, among the nobles and in the squares, a reminder that trust, once broken, was slow to mend. Keret, his strength restored but his heart heavy with the memory of Yassib's challenge, sought to rebuild the unity of his house. He walked among the people, his presence a beacon of stability, his voice steady as he spoke of the God's mercy. In the great hall, he addressed the nobles, his crimson robes catching the torchlight, his words a call to harmony. Khubur is blessed by El, he said, his voice resonating like a bell. The storm has passed, and together we stand under the gods' light. Let us honor their will and rebuild our strength as one. The elders nodded, their loyalty unwavering, but the younger nobles, once swayed by Yassib, shifted uneasily, their eyes searching for signs of weakness. Huriya, her heart a fortress of love and resolve, worked tirelessly to mend the rift. She moved through the city, her gown glowing in the sunlight, her voice soothing the fears of the people. She visited the markets, sharing bread with merchants, and the fields, praising the farmers' toil. In the palace, she gathered the women of the court, weaving garlands of myrtle and laurel, their hands united in a shared purpose. To Yassib, she offered a mother's love, seeking him in the palace gardens where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. Yassib, she said, her voice a melody that softened the night, you are our son, Khubur's future. Your heart was bold, but now let it be wise. Stand with your father, and let us heal our house together. Yassib, his ambition humbled by El's divine command, stood tall, his blue robes catching the moonlight. His eyes, once burning with fire, now held a quieter light, tempered by the weight of his folly. Mother, he said, his voice low but earnest, I sought only Khubur's strength, but I see now the God's will rests with Father. I will serve and seek forgiveness for my challenge. His words were a balm, and Huriya embraced him, her heart lifting, though a shadow of caution remained, for ambition, once kindled, could smolder beneath the surface. To seal the reconciliation, Keret and Huriya ordered a grand ritual of unity, a testament to Khubur's renewed faith. The city prepared with fervor, raising altars of polished stone and cedar in every square, their surfaces anointed with oil that gleamed like starlight. The people brought offerings jars of wine as red as the dawn, baskets of figs, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret, Huriya, and Yassib stood together before the great altar in the temple of El, their hands joined, their voices a chorus of devotion. El, Father of all, we thank you for your mercy, Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. Atheret, Mother of creation, guide our hearts, Huriya added, scattering petals of myrtle that fluttered like tiny flames. Yassib, his voice steady, spoke, I honor my father and the gods, and vow to serve Khubur. The priests, led by Elim, chanted hymns that wove through the air like threads of light, their voices a tide that lifted the city spirit. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. The crowd joined, their prayers rising like smoke, and the air grew warm, scented with cedar and myrrh. Yet as the ritual ended, a faint chill swept through the temple, a whisper of Atherat's unresolved judgment. The people stirred, their eyes searching the sky, and Elim raised his staff, his voice grave. The gods are merciful, but their gaze is stern, he said. Honor them always, for their will is a river with depths unseen. Keret, his heart steadied by the ritual, felt the shadow of Atherat's warning, a reminder of the vow he had delayed and the curse it had brought. He sought solace in the temple, kneeling before the great bull statue, its obsidian eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. El, Father of all, keep my house whole, he prayed, his voice a whisper in the flickering lamplight. Atherat, forgive my lapse, and let Khubur's light endure. The temple was silent, but a warmth touched his heart, as if El's presence lingered, a faint promise of protection. Yassib, his ambition tempered, took steps to rebuild trust. He joined the warriors in their drills, his spear gleaming as he trained beside them, his laughter a sign of renewed loyalty. He sat in the council, listening to the elders, his voice measured as he offered counsel. Yet some nobles, their faith shaken by the rebellion, watched him with caution, their whispers a reminder of the fragile trust that held Khubur together. Huria, ever vigilant, guided him with a mother's wisdom, her presence a bridge between past and future. As the days passed, Khubur's wounds began to heal. The people returned to their songs, their hymns rising to the heavens, and the markets buzzed with renewed vigor. Yet the shadow of Atharat lingered, a subtle tension that whispered of divine consequences yet to unfold. Huria, her senses sharp, felt the weight of the god's gaze, and she stood on the palace balcony each night, her eyes tracing the stars. El, keep us in your light, she prayed, her voice soft as the breeze. Atharat, guide us through the tides of your will. One evening, as the moon rose full in silver, Keret joined her, his hand resting on hers. The gods have spared us, he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. But I fear their judgment is not yet done. Huria nodded, her presence a steady flame. We will face it together, she said, with Yassib at our side, and Khubur's heart united. Yassib, standing nearby, bowed, his eyes reflecting the starlight, his vow a promise to serve. The city slept, its heart beating with a fragile hope, the scars of rebellion softening under the light of unity. Yet the shadow of Athirat's judgment remained, a tide that could yet rise, a reminder that the god's will was a path both bright and perilous. The stars shone over Khubur, their glow a gentle guide, weaving the fates of kings, queens, and princes into the tapestry of divine destiny. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their light. Let the scent of myrtle, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and divine will weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur broke with a serene glow, its golden rays weaving through the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops like threads of divine promise. The air was rich with the scent of blooming oleander and the faint salt of the great sea, carried on a breeze that whispered of hope and renewal. The scars of Yassib's rebellion were fading, softened by the unity forged through El's divine intervention and the tireless efforts of Queen Huria. King Keret, his crimson and blue robes shimmering like a sunset, stood as a beacon of restored authority, his heart steadied by the love of his queen and the loyalty of his son. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, the shadow of Atharat's judgment lingered, a subtle tide that hinted at tests yet to come, a reminder that the god's will was a river with depths unseen. Khubur flourished under Keret's consolidated reign, its fields heavy with golden wheat, its markets alive with the hum of trade, and its sea sparkling with abundant catches. The people, their faith renewed, sang hymns to El and Shatiqatu, their voices rising like waves to the heavens. The temples glowed with cedar fires, their smoke curling upward like prayers, and the city's heart beat with a quiet strength. Huria, her white linen gown glowing like moonlight, moved among the people, her wisdom a guiding star. She oversaw the weaving of new banners, their crimson and gold threads telling tales of unity, and joined the priests in their rituals, pouring wine upon the altars with a grace that seemed to summon the gods themselves. The birth of new children to Keret and Huria brought a fresh light to Khubur, a promise of a legacy that would endure beyond the trials of the past. Their daughter, Thitmanit, was born under a sky ablaze with stars, her cries a melody that echoed through the palace. A son, Ilhu, followed, his eyes bright as the dawn, his laughter a spark that warmed the hearts of all who heard it. The people celebrated, their voices rising in songs of joy, and the nobles, once divided by Yassib's rebellion, gathered in the great hall to honor the new heirs. Keret, holding his children, felt a gratitude so deep it rooted him to the earth, his heart full of the promise of a house reborn. Yassib, his ambition tempered by El's command, took his place as a loyal son, his blue robes catching the sunlight as he stood beside his father. He trained with the warriors, his spear gleaming, and sat in the council, his voice measured as he offered counsel. Yet his eyes, though softened, held a quiet spark, a reminder of the fire that had once challenged the throne. Huriya watched him closely, her mother's heart torn between pride and caution, knowing that ambition, once kindled, could smolder beneath the surface. She drew him into the family's rituals, guiding him with love, and Yassib vowed to protect his siblings, his words a thread weaving him back into the fabric of Khubur. Yet the gods, ever watchful, were not content to let Khubur rest in peace. One evening, as the moon rose full in silver, a strange omen appeared. A shadow passed over the sea, its waters darkening as if touched by an unseen hand. The fishermen, their nets empty for the first time in months, whispered of Atharat's gaze, and the priests, led by Elim, gathered in the temple, their faces etched with concern. The air grew heavy, scented with cedar and a faint chill, and a dream came to Keret that night, its images vivid and foreboding. He stood upon a cliff, the sea crashing below, and Atharat appeared, her form vast and radiant, her eyes like storms held in check. "Keret, son of El," she said, her voice a thunder that shook his soul, "your house is restored, but your heart has grown proud. Offer tribute to me, greater than before, or my tide will rise again." Keret awoke, his breath quick, his heart heavy with dread. He sought Huriya in the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. "Atharat has spoken," he said, his voice low, "and her warning chills me. I delayed my vow once, and her curse nearly took me. We must offer tribute to keep her favor and protect our children." Huriya, her eyes bright with resolve, nodded. "We will honor her," she said, her voice a steady melody. "Let us call the people, and let our family stand together before the gods." The city prepared for a grand ritual to appease Atharat, its squares alive with purpose. Altars were raised, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people brought their finest offerings, jars of wine as red as the dawn, baskets of pomegranates, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret, Huriya, and Yassib stood together before the great altar in the temple of Atharat, their hands joined, their voices united. Thitmanet and Ilhu, cradled in their parents' arms, seemed to glow with the promise of the future. "Atharat, mother of creation," Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. "Accept our tribute, and keep our house in your light," Huriya added, scattering petals of saffron that fluttered like tiny flames. Yassib, his voice steady, spoke, "I honor the gods and my father's reign, and vow to serve Khubur." The priests chanted, their voices a tide that wove through the air, and the people joined, their prayers rising like smoke to the heavens. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. The air grew warm, scented with myrrh and jasmine, and a soft breeze swept through the temple, a sign that Atharat had heard. Yet a faint shadow lingered, a whisper of the goddess's stern gaze, a reminder that her favor was a fragile gift. Keret, his heart steadied by the ritual, felt the weight of Atharat's warning, a tide that could yet rise. He walked with Huriya and Yassib through the palace gardens, the moonlight bathing them in silver. "The gods test us," he said, his voice soft, "but our family is our strength." Huriya nodded, her hand resting on his, her presence a steady flame. "We will honor them always," she said, and guide our children in their light. Yassib, his eyes reflecting the stars, vowed to protect his siblings, his heart bound to Khubur's future. The city, its unity restored, pulsed with a quiet joy. The people returned to their songs, their hymns rising to the heavens, and the markets buzzed with renewed vigor. Thitmanet and Ilhu grew, their laughter a melody that filled the palace, their presence a promise of a legacy enduring. Yet the shadow of Atharat's judgment remained, a subtle tension that whispered of tests yet to come. Huria, her senses sharp, stood on the palace balcony each night, her eyes tracing the constellations. El, keep our house whole, she prayed, her voice a whisper in the dark. Atharat, guide us through your tides. As the stars shone over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Keret stood beside her, his hand holding hers, Yassib at their side. The city slept, its heart beating with hope, the scars of rebellion softened by the light of family and faith. Yet the gods' will was a river with depths unseen, and the tides of destiny could yet rise, weaving the fates of kings, queens, and princes into the eternal tapestry of the divine. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of jasmine, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where love and divine will weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur rose with a hesitant glow, its golden light dimmed by a sky heavy with stillness, as if the heavens held their breath. The air, once rich with the scent of blooming oleander and the salt of the great sea, now carried a faint dryness, a whisper of dust that clung to the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops. King Keret, his crimson and blue robes shimmering like a fading sunset, stood as a pillar of enduring strength, his heart warmed by the love of his queen, Huria, and their children, Thitmanet and Ilhu. Queen Huria, her white linen gown glowing like moonlight, moved through the city with a grace that steadied its people. Yet a new shadow had fallen, a divine test from Atharat, as the rain ceased and a drought crept over Khubur, testing the unity and faith of the royal house under the gods' unyielding gaze. The city had flourished in the years since Yassib's rebellion, its fields heavy with grain, its markets alive with trade, and its sea sparkling with abundant catches. The scars of discord had healed, softened by the unity forged through El's intervention and the tireless efforts of Huria and Yassib, who now served as a loyal heir. The birth of Thitmanet and Ilhu had brought joy, their laughter a melody that filled the palace. Thitmanet, now a young girl with eyes like starlit pools, danced through the gardens, her voice a song that lifted the spirits of all who heard. Ilhu, sturdy and bright, followed his brother Yassib, his small hands grasping at spears, his laughter echoing through the courtyards. The people celebrated their royal family, their hymns to El and Shatiqatu rising like waves, their cedar fires burning bright in the temples. Yet the gods, ever watchful, sent a new trial to test Khubur's faith. The rains, once plentiful, ceased, and the streams that fed the fields grew thin, their waters dwindling to a trickle. The wheat, once golden, withered under a relentless sun, and the sea, though still bountiful, could not quench the thirst of the land. The people gathered in the squares, their faces etched with worry, their murmurs speaking of Atharat's stern gaze. The priests, led by Elim, burned cedar and offered wine, but the sky remained unyielding, its blue expanse unbroken by clouds. The city's heart trembled, its prosperity threatened by a divine test that echoed the shadow of Keret's past lapse. Keret, his heart heavy with the memory of Atharat's curse, felt the weight of this new trial. He stood in the temple of El, before the great bull statue, its obsidian eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. "Father El," he prayed, his voice a whisper in the flickering lamplight. Guide us through this drought. Atharat tests us, and I fear my vow still lingers in her judgment. Show us the path to your light. The temple was silent, but a warmth touched his heart, a faint promise of divine guidance. Huriya, her wisdom a steady flame, rallied the city to face the drought. She walked among the farmers, her gown catching the sunlight, her voice soothing their fears. She ordered the digging of new wells, her hands guiding the workers, and sent messengers to Udum, seeking her father Pabil's counsel on sustaining the land. In the palace, she gathered Thitmanit and Ilhu, teaching them the songs of their people, their voices a spark of hope. To Yassib, she spoke of unity, her eyes meeting his with a mother's love. Yassib, our strength lies in our family, she said, her voice soft as the breeze. Help us lead Khubur through this trial, and honor the gods with your heart. Yassib, his ambition long-tempered, nodded, his blue robes gleaming as he stood beside her. Mother, I will serve, he said, his voice steady. Let us face this test together, and keep Khubur whole. He joined the warriors in guarding the wells, his presence a reassurance to the people, and sat in the council, his counsel wise beyond his years. Thitmanit and Ilhu, though young, followed their mother, carrying baskets of figs to the poor, their laughter a light in the growing shadow. Yet the drought deepened, the land cracking under the sun's unrelenting gaze. The people's hymns faltered, their voices dry as the earth, and whispers of fear spread through the markets. The nobles, though loyal, grew restless, their eyes turning to the sky for signs of divine mercy. One night, as the moon rose pale and thin, a vision came to Huriya in the palace gardens, where the jasmine wilted and the fountains ran low. The air grew warm, scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea, and Atharat appeared, her form vast and radiant, her eyes like storms held in check. Daughter of Udum, she said, her voice a tide that shook the heart. Khubur's pride has grown, but its faith wanes. Offer tribute to me, greater than before, and lead your people in humility, or my drought will claim your land. Huriya awoke, her breath quick, and sought Keret in the palace, where the lamplight flickered like a fading star. Atharat has spoken, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. We must offer tribute and call the people to a ritual of humility, to restore her favor and bring rain to Khubur. Keret, his heart heavy with the weight of past vows, nodded. We will honor her, he said, and lead our family and people as one. The city prepared for a grand ritual, its squares filled with a quiet purpose. Altars were raised, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people, though weary, brought their finest offerings, jars of wine, baskets of pomegranates, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret, Huriya, Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu stood together before the great altar in the temple of Atharat, their hands joined, their voices united. Atharat, mother of creation, Keret intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. Forgive our pride and restore your reigns, Huriya added, scattering petals of saffron that fluttered like tiny flames. Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu, their voices clear, joined the prayer, a symbol of the family's unity. The priests chanted, their voices a tide that wove through the air, and the people knelt, their heads bowed in humility. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the faint sunlight, a plea for divine mercy. The air grew still, scented with cedar and myrrh, and a soft rumble echoed in the distance, the first sign of clouds gathering over the hills. The crowd stirred, their eyes lifting, and a gentle rain began to fall, its droplets a blessing that kissed the parched earth. The people wept, their voices rising in hymns of gratitude, and Khubur's heart pulsed with renewed hope. Yet Huriya, her senses sharp, felt a lingering shadow, a whisper of Atharat's stern gaze. She stood with Keret and their children on the palace balcony, the rain a soft curtain around them. "The gods have shown mercy," she said, her voice a melody in the night. "But their tests are not done. We must remain humble and honor them always." Keret nodded, his hand holding hers, his heart steadied by her strength. Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu stood close, their presence a promise of a legacy enduring. As the stars broke through the clouds, their light a gentle guide, Khubur slept, its heart beating with fragile hope. The drought had eased, but the gods' will was a river with depths unseen, and the tides of destiny could yet rise, weaving the fates of kings, queens, and their children into the eternal tapestry of the divine. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of rain, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where faith and divine will weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur unfurled with a radiant warmth, its golden light cascading across the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops like a blessing woven from the heavens. The air was rich with the scent of blooming jasmine, and the faint salt of the great sea carried on a breeze that sang of renewal and peace. The drought that had tested Khubur's faith had lifted its fields once more heavy with golden wheat, its streams flowing with crystal clarity. King Keret, his crimson and blue robes glowing like a sunset, stood as a pillar of enduring strength, his heart lifted by the love of Queen Hurriya and their children, Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu. Hurriya, her white linen gown shimmering like moonlight, moved through the city with a grace that steadied its people. Yet a final divine test loomed, a vision from the gods that would challenge Keret's legacy and the unity of his house under the watchful eyes of El and Atharat. Khubur had blossomed in the wake of the drought, its prosperity a testament to the family's faith and the gods' mercy. The markets buzzed with merchants trading amber, lapis, and silks, their voices bright with confidence. The sea yielded bountiful catches, and the temples glowed with cedar fires, their smoke curling upward like prayers. The people sang hymns to El and Atharat, their voices rising like waves, their faith restored by the rains that had kissed the earth. Thitmanit, now a young woman with eyes like starlit pools, walked among the people, her gentle wisdom a reflection of her mother's. Ilhu, strong and bright, trained with the warriors, his laughter a spark that warmed the courtyards. Yassib, his ambition tempered, stood as a loyal heir, his blue robes gleaming as he counseled the nobles with a steady hand. The palace, adorned with tapestries of crimson and gold, echoed with the laughter of feasts and the songs of children. Keret and Hurriya presided over gatherings, their hands brushing as they shared a goblet, their smiles a beacon of unity. Thitmanit sang hymns to the gods, her voice a melody that softened the edges of the night, while Ilhu, his eyes bright with curiosity, listened to the elders' tales of Khubur's past. Yassib, ever watchful, joined his siblings, his heart bound to their future, his vow to serve a thread in the family's tapestry. The people looked to the royal house with awe, seeing in their unity a promise of a legacy enduring through the ages. Yet the gods, ever watchful, sent a final test to measure Khubur's faith. One night, as the moon hung low and silver, a vision came to Keret in the quiet of his chamber. The air grew warm, scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea, and the veil between worlds parted. He stood upon a hill overlooking Khubur, its lights glowing like a constellation fallen to earth. El appeared, his form vast and radiant, his voice a melody that soothed the soul. Beside him stood Atharat, her eyes like storms held in check, her presence a tide of divine will. "Keret, my son," El said, his voice resonant, "your house is strong, but pride lingers in your heart. Atharat demands a final tribute, a vow of humility from your family, to seal your legacy. Fail, and Khubur's light will fade. Keret awoke, his breath quick, his heart heavy with the weight of divine expectation. He sought Huriya in the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. El and Atheret have spoken, he said, his voice low, and they test us once more. We must offer a tribute of humility, a vow from our family, to secure Khubur's future. Huriya, her eyes bright with resolve, nodded. We will lead our children, she said, her voice a steady melody. Let us call the people and face this test together, as a family united. The city prepared for a grand ritual, its squares alive with a quiet purpose. Altars were raised, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people brought their finest offerings, jars of wine as red as the dawn, baskets of figs, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret, Huriya, Yassib, Thitmanet, and Ilhu stood together before the great altar in the temple of Atheret, their hands joined, their voices a chorus of devotion. The air was warm, scented with cedar and myrrh, and the crowd gathered, their heads bowed in reverence. Keret, his crimson robes catching the sunlight, spoke first, his voice steady yet humble. Atheret, Mother of Creation, we offer our hearts in humility, honoring your will and the light of El. He poured wine upon the stones, its crimson streams soaking into the earth. Huriya, her gown glowing like moonlight, added, we vow to serve Khubur with love and wisdom, guiding our children in your path. She scattered petals of saffron, their golden hues fluttering like tiny flames. Yassib, his voice clear, spoke, I vow to honor my father and the gods, serving Khubur with a humble heart. Thitmanet and Ilhu, their young voices bright, joined, we follow our parents and the gods, to keep Khubur's light alive. The priests, led by Elim, chanted hymns that wove through the air like threads of light, their voices a tide that lifted the city's spirit. The people knelt, their prayers rising like smoke, and a pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. As the ritual reached its peak, the air grew still, and a soft breeze swept through the temple, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine. A single cloud appeared, its edges glowing with silver, and the people gasped, their eyes lifting to the sky. The cloud dissolved, leaving a radiant light that bathed Khubur, a sign that El and Atheret had accepted the tribute. The city erupted in hymns of gratitude, their voices a wave that echoed through the streets. The fields seemed to bloom anew, the streams flowed stronger, and the sea sparkled with promise. Keret, his heart lifted, stood with Huriya and their children, their unity a shield against the trials of the past. Yet a faint shadow lingered, a whisper of Atheret's stern gaze, a reminder that the god's favor was a river with depths unseen. Elim, his white beard trembling, raised his staff, his voice grave. The gods have shown mercy, he said, but their will demands vigilance. Honor them always, and Khubur will endure. In the days that followed, Thitmanet and Ilhu grew, their presence a light in the palace. Thitmanet, her wisdom blossoming, sang hymns that soothed the people, while Ilhu, his strength growing, trained with Yassib, their laughter a bond that strengthened the family. Yassib, his heart steadfast, counseled the nobles, his wisdom earning their respect. Huriya, her love a steady flame, guided her children, her eyes ever watchful for signs of divine will. Keret, his legacy secure, walked among his people, his voice a call to unity, his heart grateful for the god's mercy. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Keret stood on the palace balcony with Huriya, Yassib, Thitmanet, and Ilhu at his side. "The gods have tested us," he said, his voice soft, "and our family has endured." Huria nodded, her hand holding his, her presence a beacon of hope. "We will honor them always," she said, "and guide our children in their light." The city slept, its heart beating with a quiet joy, its future woven into the eternal tapestry of the divine. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of jasmine, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where faith and family weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny. The dawn over Khubur broke with a celestial glow, its golden rays weaving through the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops like threads of divine light, casting a warmth that seemed to embrace the earth itself. The air was fragrant with the scent of blooming myrtle, and the faint salt of the great sea carried on a breeze that sang of peace and fulfillment. King Keret, his crimson and blue robes glowing like a sunset over the hills, stood as a pillar of enduring strength, his heart full with the love of Queen Huria and their children, Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu. Huria, her white linen gown shimmering like moonlight, moved through the city with a grace that bound its people together. The trials of rebellion and drought had passed, but the gods' gaze remained, their will a river that had shaped Khubur's fate, now guiding it toward a legacy that would echo through the ages. Khubur flourished under Keret's reign, its fields heavy with golden wheat, its markets alive with the hum of trade, and its sea sparkling with abundant catches. The people, their faith tempered by the tests of El and Atharat, sang hymns that rose like waves to the heavens, their voices a chorus of gratitude. The temples glowed with cedar fires, their smoke curling upward like prayers, and the city's heart pulsed with a quiet joy. Yassib, now a young man of wisdom and strength, stood as a loyal heir, his blue robes gleaming as he counseled the nobles with a steady hand. Thitmanit, her eyes like starlit pools, sang hymns that soothed the people, her wisdom blossoming like the jasmine in the palace gardens. Ilhu, strong and bright, trained with the warriors, his laughter a spark that warmed the courtyards. The palace, adorned with tapestries of crimson and gold, echoed with the laughter of feasts and the songs of children. Keret and Huria presided over gatherings, their hands brushing as they shared a goblet, their smiles a beacon of unity. Thitmanit, now a young woman, wove garlands of laurel and myrtle, her hands deft as she taught the women of the court, her voice a melody that softened the edges of the night. Ilhu, his eyes bright with curiosity, listened to the elders' tales, his questions a spark that kindled hope for the future. Yassib, his ambition transformed into devotion, stood beside his siblings, his heart bound to Khubur's legacy, his vow to serve a thread in the family's tapestry. Yet the gods, ever watchful, sent a final vision to affirm Khubur's path. One evening, as the moon rose full in silver, Keret stood in the temple of El, before the great bull statue, its obsidian eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. The air grew warm, scented with myrrh and the tang of the sea, and the veil between worlds parted. El appeared, his form vast and radiant, his voice a melody that soothed the soul. Beside him stood Atharat, her eyes softened, her presence a tide of divine grace. "Keret, my son," El said, his voice resonant, "you have honored our will through trials of curse, rebellion, and drought. Your house is strong, your legacy secure. Lead Khubur with humility, and your name will endure." Atharat, her voice a gentle wave, added, "Your vows are fulfilled, your heart humbled. Khubur is my light, and your children will carry it forward." The vision faded, leaving a soft glow that lingered like a promise, and Keret fell to his knees, his heart full of gratitude. He sought Huria in the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed under the stars. "El and Atharat have spoken," he said, his voice soft. and our legacy is blessed. Our children will carry Khubur's light, and the God's favor rests upon us. Huriya, her eyes bright with tears, took his hand, her presence a steady flame. We have walked their path together, she said, and our family will honor them always. To celebrate the divine affirmation, Keret and Huriya called for a grand festival, a testament to Khubur's enduring faith. The city prepared with fervor, its squares alive with purpose. Altars were raised, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people brought their finest offerings, jars of wine as red as the dawn, baskets of pomegranates, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Keret, Huriya, Yassib, Thitmanet, and Ilhu stood together before the great altar in the temple of El, their hands joined, their voices a chorus of devotion. The air was warm, scented with cedar and myrrh, and the crowd gathered, their heads bowed in reverence. Keret, his crimson robes catching the sunlight, spoke first, his voice steady and humble. El, Father of all, we thank you for your light, which has guided us through trials. He poured wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. Huriya, her gown glowing like moonlight, added, Atharat, Mother of creation, we honor your mercy, which has blessed our house. She scattered petals of saffron, their golden hues fluttering like tiny flames. Yassib, his voice clear, spoke, I vow to lead Khubur with wisdom, honoring my father and the gods. Thitmanet and Ilhu, their young voices bright, joined, we will carry our family's light and keep Khubur strong. The priests, led by Elim, chanted hymns that wove through the air like threads of light, their voices a tide that lifted the city's spirit. The people knelt, their prayers rising like smoke, and a pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. As the ritual reached its peak, the air grew still, and a gentle breeze swept through the temple, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine. A radiant light bathed Khubur, a sign that El and Atharat had sealed their blessing, and the people wept, their voices rising in hymns of gratitude. The festival stretched into the night, the stars shining like lanterns above the revelry. Tables groaned under the weight of feast splatters of figs, pomegranates, and honeyed cakes, jars of wine that glowed like rubies in the torchlight. Thitmanet sang, her voice a melody that wove through the air, while Ilhu danced with the children, his laughter a spark of joy. Yassib, his heart steadfast, stood with the nobles, his presence a promise of stability. Keret and Huriya moved among their people, their hands joined, their smiles a testament to the God's mercy. As the years passed, Khubur's legacy grew strong. Yassib, trained in wisdom and strength, prepared to lead, his heart guided by the lessons of his youth. Thitmanet, her wisdom a beacon, counseled the women of the court, her songs a light that soothed the city. Ilhu, his strength blossoming, stood with the warriors, his loyalty a pillar for the future. Keret, his reign a tapestry of trials and triumphs, walked with Huriya, their love a flame that burned eternal. The gods' tests had forged their house, and Khubur stood as a city of light, its name etched in the annals of the divine. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Keret stood on the palace balcony with Huriya, Yassib, Thitmanet, and Ilhu at his side. The gods have woven our fate, he said, his voice soft, and our legacy will endure. Huriya nodded, her hand holding his, her presence a beacon of hope. We have honored them, she said, and our children will carry their light. The city slept, its heart beating with a quiet joy, its future secured in the eternal tapestry of the divine. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of jasmine, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where faith, family, and divine will weave a delicate balance, guiding the fates of kings and queens into the eternal tides of destiny. The twilight over Khubur unfolded with a celestial grace, its indigo and silver hues draping the city's stone walls and cedar rooftops like a mantle woven from the stars. The air was rich with the scent of blooming jasmine and the faint salt of the great sea, carried on a breeze that whispered of peace and fulfillment. The trials of curse, rebellion, and drought had forged Khubur into a city of enduring light, its heart bound by the love and faith of King Keret, Queen Hurriya, and their children, Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu. As the years had woven their tapestry, the time had come for Keret's reign to pass into legend, his legacy carried forward by his heirs under the watchful eyes of El and Atharat, whose divine will had shaped the city's fate into an eternal harmony. Khubur stood as a beacon of prosperity, its fields heavy with golden wheat, its markets alive with the hum of trade, and its sea sparkling with abundant catches. The people sang hymns to El and Atharat, their voices rising like waves to the heavens, their faith tempered by the trials that had tested their king and his house. The temples glowed with cedar fires, their smoke curling upward like prayers, and the city pulsed with a quiet joy. Yassib, now a man of wisdom and strength, stood ready to lead, his blue robes gleaming as he counseled the nobles with a steady hand. Thitmanit, her eyes like starlit pools, sang hymns that soothed the people, her wisdom a light that guided the women of the court. Ilhu, strong and bright, stood with the warriors, his laughter a spark that warmed the courtyards. Keret, his crimson and blue robe softened by time, felt the weight of years upon him, his strength fading like a sunset yielding to the stars. Yet his heart was full, warmed by the love of Hurriya and the promise of their children. He walked through the palace gardens, where fountains sang and jasmine bloomed, his steps slow but steady, his eyes tracing the constellations. Hurriya, her white linen gown shimmering like moonlight, walked beside him, her hand a steady anchor, her presence a flame that burned eternal. "Our house is strong," he said, his voice soft as the breeze, "and the gods have blessed us. Khubur's light will endure through our children." Hurriya nodded, her eyes bright with love and gratitude. "We have walked the gods' path together," she said, her voice a melody that softened the night. "Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu will carry our legacy, and Khubur will shine under their hands." Their children gathered around them, their voices a chorus of devotion, and the family stood as one, a pillar of unity under the stars. As the seasons turned, Keret's strength waned, his breath growing soft, his eyes dimming like a lamp before dawn. The people, sensing their king's time was near, gathered in the squares, their hymns rising in quiet reverence. The priests, led by a new high priest following Elim's passing, burned cedar and offered wine, their chants a plea for El's guidance. One evening, as the moon rose full and silver, Keret lay in his chamber, the air warm with the scent of myrrh and the tang of the sea. Hurriya sat beside him, her hand holding his, her voice a lullaby that eased his soul. Yassib, Thitmanit, and Ilhu stood close, their presence a circle of love, their eyes bright with tears. "El has called me," Keret said, his voice a whisper, "and I go to his light. Yassib, lead Khubur with wisdom and humility. Thitmanit, sing the gods' songs, and keep our people's hearts strong. Ilhu, stand with your brother, and let your strength be Khubur's shield." His children knelt, their vows a promise to honor his words, and Hurriya, her heart heavy but steadfast, kissed his brow. "You have been our light," she said, her voice trembling. "We will carry it forward, and the gods will guide us." As the stars reached their zenith, Keret's breath stilled, and a gentle breeze swept through the chamber, carrying the scent of jasmine and cedar. The city paused, its heart hushed, and a soft glow bathed the palace, a sign that El had welcomed his son. The people wept, their voices rising in hymns of gratitude and sorrow, and Khubur mourned its king, whose reign had woven a tapestry of trials and triumph. Yassib ascended the throne, his blue robes glowing like the sea under sunlight, his heart tempered by the lessons of his youth. He stood before the great altar in the temple of El, his voice steady as he vowed to lead with wisdom and honor. El, Father of all, guide my hand, he intoned, pouring wine upon the stones, its crimson stream soaking into the earth. Atheret, Mother of creation, keep Khubur in your light. The priests chanted, their voices a tide that wove through the air, and the people knelt, their prayers rising like smoke. A pair of doves was released, their wings catching the sunlight, a symbol of peace and divine favor. Huriya, now the Queen Mother, stood beside Yassib, her white gown shimmering, her wisdom a beacon for the city. She guided him with a mother's love, her counsel steadying his reign. Thitmanit, her voice a melody that soothed the people, sang hymns that wove the city's heart together, her wisdom guiding the women of the court. Ilhu, his strength a pillar, stood with the warriors, his loyalty a shield for Khubur's future. The family, united, carried Keret's legacy forward, their love, a flame that burned eternal. Khubur flourished under Yassib's rule, its fields blooming, its markets thriving, and its sea sparkling with promise. The people, their faith steadfast, sang hymns to El and Atheret, their voices a chorus that echoed through the ages. The temples glowed with cedar fires, their smoke a testament to divine mercy, and the city stood as a beacon of light, its name etched in the annals of the gods. Huriya, her heart full, walked the palace gardens, her eyes tracing the stars, her prayers a whisper of gratitude. El and Atheret, she said, you have woven our fate, and Khubur endures. One evening, as the stars shone over Khubur, a vision came to Yassib in the temple, where the great bull statue stood sentinel. The air grew warm, scented with myrrh and jasmine, and El appeared, his form radiant, his voice a melody. Yassib, son of Keret, he said, you honor your father's legacy, lead with humility, and Khubur's light will shine eternal. Atheret, her eyes softened, added, your house is blessed, and my favor rests upon you. The vision faded, leaving a glow that lingered like a promise, and Yassib knelt, his heart full of gratitude. The city gathered for a final festival to honor Keret's memory, its squares alive with joy. Altars were raised, their stones polished to mirror the sky, their surfaces piled with cedar and anointed with oil. The people brought offerings jars of wine, baskets of figs, and lambs whose wool shimmered like moonlight. Yassib, Huriya, Thitmanit, and Ilhu stood together, their voices united in prayer. El, Father of all, we thank you for Keret's light, Yassib intoned, pouring wine upon the stones. Atheret, Mother of creation, guide our house, Huriya added, scattering petals of saffron. The air was warm, scented with cedar and myrrh, and a gentle breeze swept through, a sign of divine blessing. As the stars rose over Khubur, their light a gentle guide, Yassib stood on the palace balcony with Huriya, Thitmanit, and Ilhu at his side. The city slept, its heart beating with a quiet joy, its legacy secured in the eternal tapestry of the divine. Keret's name lived on, a melody woven into the songs of his people, a light that would never fade. Sleep now, dear listener, as the stars of Khubur cradle you in their glow. Let the scent of jasmine, the rhythm of sacred chants, carry you into dreams where faith, family, and divine will weave an eternal harmony, guiding the fates of kings and queens through the tides of destiny.